Good morning. Here begins media number 1 of the deposition of Jeffrey H. Kinrich, Volume 1, in the matter of Tesla Incorporated versus Martin Tripp. This case is in the United States District Court, District of Nevada, and the case number is 3:1-CV-00296-LRH-CBC. Today's date is May 9th, 2019, and the time is 9:44 a.m.
Good morning, Mr. Kinrich.
This deposition is taking place at 523 West 6th Street, Suite 400, Los Angeles, California, 90014. The videographer is Jeffrey Lopez, appearing on behalf of Depo Dynamics. Would counsel please identify yourselves and state whom you represent?
Allison LeBeau from Houston Hennigan, on behalf of Tesla and for the witness, and with me is Stephen Richards, also of Houston Hennigan.
Good morning, William Fischbach of Tiffany & Bosco on behalf of the defendant and counterclaimant Martin Tripp.
The reporter today is Alejandria Kate with Depo Dynamics. Would the reporter please swear in the witness?
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give in the following deposition proceeding should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Kinrich.
Good morning.
True or false, within the last year, at least one federal court has excluded your expert opinion.
I'm sorry, you need to slow down. Start over.
True or false, within the last year, at least one federal court has excluded your expert opinion because you relied on speculation to arrive at your conclusions.
I don't know about that. It could have happened. I am unaware.
Exhibit 1, counsel.
Yes. Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 1. It is a Westlaw opinion in the case of Toyo Tire and Rubber Company versus Double Star.
I have to go off the record. I have no power. Can we go off the record, please?
We are off the record at 9:46 a.m. We are back on the record at 9:48 a.m.
So, apologies, Mr. Kinrich, we had to go off the record due to some technical difficulties, but before we went off the record, I handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 1, which is the court's opinion in Toyo Tire and Rubber Company versus Double Star Dongfeng Tire Company Limited. Did you serve as an expert witness in that case?
I did.
Did you read the highlighted portion of this opinion in Exhibit 1?
I just did.
And you were unaware that the court had excluded your opinion in that case because you relied on speculation?
Correct.
A late objection misstates the court's opinion.
Do you have that highlighted portion in front of you, sir?
I do.
Could you please read that into the record without, you don't have to read the actual citations, but could you just read the substance of what the court found there?
Toyo submits 2 pieces of evidence to demonstrate its lost profits. First, Toyo cites to the declaration of its senior director of marketing, Amy Coleman, who determined, based on her, quote, gut feeling, end quote, that, quote, Toyo could have made half of the sales that otherwise went to the AMPMT, end quote. Second, Toyo states that its damages expert, Jeffrey Kinrich, will testify regarding Toyo's lost profits. Kinrich's expert report clearly states that his calculations are based on Ms. Coleman's assumption, i.e. gut feeling. As the court previously determined in its contempt order, this evidence is not sufficient to demonstrate Toyo's lost profits resulting from defendant's infringement. Ms. Coleman's arbitrary percentage is not a reasonably certain basis on which the jury could determine damages, and the court cannot give any weight or credibility to Kinrich's expert opinion as he relies on Coleman's speculation to arrive at his conclusions.
That's sufficient, sir. So, sir, it's my understanding you were unaware of the court's ruling in this case until I just handed you that?
That's correct.
Do you recall what you calculated the lost profits to be in that case?
Numerically?
Yes.
No.
Was it in the millions, tens of millions?
It's not $10,000 because the case wouldn't have gone anywhere, and it's not billions, but otherwise I don't remember at all.
Have your full name for the record, please?
Jeffrey H. Kinrich.
Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 2. Do you recognize that document?
I do not recognize the first several pages of it. A few pages in, it appears to be my report. So,
Okay.
so if you ignore or remove the first 4 pages, I recognize the rest.
All right. So with the exception of the first 4 pages of Exhibit 2, you'd agree with me that the rest comprises your expert opinion in this case?
Well, and other things. I mean, it has my resume and some other attachments, but yes.
We'll strike that. Except for the first 4 pages of Exhibit 2, this is your written expert opinion and accompanying documents that you submitted in this case, correct?
You got to be careful there because there are other documents I've also submitted, so this would not be the full set of accompanying documents I have submitted. You've got discovery from my files of other documents as well.
Okay. Well, sir, I don't want to parse words with you, but Exhibit 2 represents the written expert report that you prepared in this case, correct?
Yes,
All right.
including my resume and things of that sort.
And so we're clear, sir, this written report is meant to encapsulate your opinions in this case regarding damages, correct?
Generally speaking, yes. It cannot encapsulate all opinions by definition because at any given sentence in here, someone could ask me for an explanation, and that explanation may not be fully described in the report. But the scope of the opinions, I think, is captured by the report.
Well, sitting here today, do you have any opinions that are not encapsulated in this report?
Oh, thousands. I mean, every sentence you could say, why do you say that, or how did you arrive at that conclusion? And all of those are essentially additional expressions of opinion, but they're within the scope of the report.
Okay. So of those thousands of opinions that you claim you have that aren't represented in that report, have you disclosed them in any other fashion in this case?
Just, I've described already that any sentence in here, you can ask me, why do I say that? And that will possibly, or at least reasonably, lead to the expression of another opinion. So they're within the scope of the report that's been marked as Exhibit 2. But the individual words are not there, as they can never be, because any level of report I write, you can always ask, why did you say that? And that could always be another sub-opinion.
Do you have any opinions in this case that are outside the scope of this report?
I do, only in the context of responses to, is it Schultz? I can't remember the name. Is Mr. Schultz, you're the expert you've designated, if that's the correct name. I have my reactions to his report, and those are certainly within the same scope as Exhibit 2, but they are not specifically laid out in Exhibit 2 because, of course, at the time I wrote Exhibit 2, his report had not been submitted.
So other than the opinions you make that are within the scope of this report and the opinions you may have regarding Mr. Schultz's report, do you have any other opinions in this case?
Not in terms of broad areas or subjects. As I already said, and I won't repeat, I have the issues about explaining opinions, and those may sometimes be argued to be sub-opinions, but other than that, the answer is no.
It's my understanding you have a Master of Science degree in Statistics from Stanford University, is that correct?
Yes.
You've got a Master of Business Administration in Finance and Quantitative Methods from the University of Maryland, is that correct?
Yes.
Does your MBA degree state on it Master of Business Administration in Finance and Quantitative Methods?
Does it state? I don't know what's physically written on the document. My degree, my major, I had 2 majors. One was finance and one was quantitative methods. So those are somewhere it says that. I don't know if it says literally on the piece of paper that's on my wall somewhere.
So you majored in Finance and Quantitative Methods in your MBA program. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
All right. But sitting here today, you don't know whether or not the degree is actually or is actually an MBA in Finance and Quantitative Methods?
Well, it's an MBA. And the degree is Master's of Business Administration. Just like my degree in statistics may not say that. It just says master's degree.
I know. I have an MBA too, but I'm saying your actual degree, it doesn't state Master of Business Administration in Finance and Quantitative Methods, does it?
I haven't seen the piece of paper for so long, I have no clue what it physically says on the face of it. It certainly says that in some record.
I mean, every MBA curriculum typically has at least one course in finance, correct?
I would presume so. I haven't studied them all.
Presumably every MBA curriculum has at least one course in quantitative methods, correct?
Probably less likely, but less certain.
What are you basing that off of?
Just the fact that a lot of people who do non-quantitative things, such as an MBA in, I don't know, organizational behavior or something, may not take quantitative methods courses.
Based on the fact that you majored in finance and quantitative methods, you consider yourself well-versed in concepts of linear regression and statistical correlation?
Not just based on that, but I do consider myself versed in those subjects.
Well, so other than your degree, what do you think makes you well-versed in those subjects of linear regression and statistical correlation?
Well, you didn't mention my statistics.
Counsel, I need to stop for just a moment. You're going too fast, both of you. I need you both to slow down, okay, for the accuracy of the record. You can please back up. Other than your degree, what do you think makes you well-versed in the subject of? Go from there, please.
Linear regression and statistical correlation.
Well, I believe, unless I misheard you, you didn't mention my statistics degree in your preface. And of course, statistics has a lot to do with it. You did in the, like 5 questions ago, but you didn't in the preface to this question where you were talking,
Preface of this question.
where you were talking about the MBA only. Further, I have an undergraduate degree that covered that subject as well. Plus, I have certainly studied, written about, and used those tools over the years since my degrees, all of which provides me background and context.
You ever served as an expert witness for Tesla before?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
You know the law firm in this case that's representing Tesla, Houston and Hennigan?
Yes?
Have you ever done work for them before in the past 10 years?
Yes.
How often?
Probably 4 or 5 matters. I'm not at all confident in that estimate, but something in that order.
Can you think of any cases in the past 10 years in which your expert opinion has been either excluded or limited in any case?
Well, other than one you showed me, which I otherwise hadn't read, no.
You familiar with the case In Re Nortel Networks, Inc., in the bankruptcy court in the District of Delaware?
Yes?
Was your expert opinion limited or excluded in that case?
Vague. Objection vague.
You aware that the court in that case found that your approach was not appropriate to the valuation task at hand?
Objection calls for speculation.
I don't remember the exact words, but the court went a different direction.
You know why your opinion was excluded in Morpho Detection Incorporated versus Smith's Detection, Inc. in the Eastern District of Virginia in 2012?
Objection assumes facts, not evidence.
Comes as a big surprise to me. I testified to my entire opinion in court, and the jury awarded the number that was based on my opinion.
Let's go to your report at Exhibit 2. It's dated November 8th. Is that correct, sir?
Yes,
And you've never prepared an amended report. Is that correct?
that is correct.
And by my estimation, the report consists of, excluding the exhibits, 26 paragraphs and 9 pages.
Yes.
So on page 1 of your report, sir, it indicates that you looked at 3 categories of damages. Is that correct?
Are you talking about the Romanet items in paragraph 1?
Correct.
Yes.
All right. And those are the only 3 categories of damages that you examined in this case?
From a legal standpoint, or from a legal perspective, perhaps, I think that's correct. I, of course, didn't. Those aren't the measures of damage. Those are categories. For example, breach of loyalty is not a measure of damage. It's essentially, as I understand it, a cause of action. And then I do some computations that I believe Tesla will argue is an appropriate measure of damages for that. So those are the right categories from, I believe, a legal perspective. My measures of damage are not exactly based on those phrases, but they correspond.
But you were, according to your report, at least as I understand it, you quantified damages as to each of those 3 categories, correct?
Not strictly speaking correct. There is, again, using breach of loyalty as an example, I quantify damages by calculating certain things that we'll get to in presumably in the next few minutes. It is my understanding that as a matter of law, that quantification I did can be used as a measure of the damages under the breach of loyalty cause of action. But I am not calculating it because it is breach of loyalty. I'm calculating what I'm calculating, and then the court or the parties will argue that whether that is applicable or not.
What's your understanding based off of?
Counsel's representations as to what the law is.
All right. And that's to the first category, the breach of loyalty, correct?
Well, it's actually true for all of them, because I am not opining as to what the legal remedy is for any cause of action. That's a legal question, not a damages question. But I am doing damage calculations on the understanding that what I do is relevant to the legal cause of action.
Well, but you indicated, at least with respect to your understanding as to the first category, the breach of loyalty. I asked you what was that based off of, and you said the representations of counsel, correct?
That's
Objection misstates prior testimony.
that counsel has informed me what the law is to their understanding.
And when you say counsel, you mean Tesla's counsel, correct?
I do.
All right. Which of Tesla's counsel informed you of what the law was?
I couldn't identify an individual, probably one of the 2 people sitting to my left, but that's just because those are the 2 people I generally spoke to.
And who were the 2 people sitting to your left?
Stephen and Allison.
You know their last names?
LeBeau and Stephen, I just forgot your last name, so I apologize. Sorry, I got yours wrong too, because I know LeBeau. But
No, you got it right.
Okay.
You got it right.
Oh,
It's Richards for the record.
Richards, thank you.
So but the 3 categories, you agree with me there's 3 categories you looked at, is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. 3 categories are losses related to Mr. Tripp's alleged breach of loyalty, correct? Category 1.
Well, those now, I was agreeing with you, but that's how I would not characterize them that way. I would talk about the categories being information related to his compensation, information related to the cost of investigation, and information related to stock price. Those are what I looked at. They correspond to what I believe are the areas of the losses that are laid out in paragraph 1. I think they're one-to-one correspondence, but what I computed is what I just described.
Okay, so I'm going to read a sentence from paragraph 1. Tell me if I've got it right. I have been asked to evaluate certain categories of losses suffered by Tesla from the alleged misconduct related to 1, Mr. Tripp's breach of loyalty, 2, Tesla's out-of-pocket losses, and 3, harm to the company measured by Tesla's stock price reaction. Did I accurately state that?
You did.
All right. Is that what this report is examining?
That is, yes, that is what this report is examining.
And so just my understanding based on that sentence is that you examined 3 categories of losses, correct?
Yes, as long as we're not saying those are the measurements of those losses, I agree. Those are the categories.
All right. I'm not talking about the actual number, I'm saying, but there are 3 categories of losses you examined, correct?
Yes.
And they are Mr. Tripp's alleged breach of loyalty, Tesla's out-of-pocket losses, and then harm to the company's stock, correct?
Correct.
Is it your opinion that Mr. Tripp caused the losses in those 3 categories?
I don't know that I have an opinion about causation, certainly not for the 3rd category, though what I have, I think, contributes to perhaps some finder of fact reaching a conclusion about causation. The 1st and 2nd, I think, are much more directly tied, and so while I don't think it's necessarily an expert opinion, I think it's sort of self-evident, especially if my understanding of the law, and especially related to the 1st category, the breach of loyalty, if my understanding of the law as to what the appropriate measure is correct, then I think it flows, and the causation is sort of self-evident.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, sir, but is it correct to state that you have a causation opinion with respect to the first 2 categories, but you do not have a causation opinion with respect to the 3rd category?
With respect to the first 2, I'm not sure if it's properly characterized as causation, or perhaps it would be there's a natural link, or perhaps another way to say it would just be that my understanding is that is an allowable remedy for the cause of action that's been asserted. I understand those may all be somewhat synonymous. I'm not sure if they're identical. On the 3rd one, we can get into it when we get to it, but I have attempted to rule out other causes, but I do not ultimately conclude that I know enough or can establish that Mr. Tripp caused the amounts that resulted in the stock price, though it's not inconsistent with that.
Right. So you have no opinion as to whether or not the 2 Business Insider articles harmed Tesla's stock price. Is that correct, sir?
I have no ultimate conclusion in that subject. I have opinions that address portions of that, portions of the causation. For example, I have attempted to rule out certain other things that might, in fact, have been causes before the analysis showed they were ruled out. And so by stripping away other things, you are left with something that the finder of fact could conclude was causation, but I am not reaching that ultimate conclusion on causation in that 3rd category.
Can you please turn to paragraph 11 of your report on page 5?
Yes.
All right. 2nd sentence in paragraph 11 states, additionally, I have been asked to discuss certain aspects of the harm to Tesla caused by plaintiff's disclosure of confidential information to the press. Did I accurately state that sentence, sir?
You did.
Are you aware that's the only time that the word cause appears in your report?
No, but I'm happy to accept your representation for that.
So I'm trying to reconcile that sentence that I just read with the testimony that I just received from you. Are you stating in paragraph 11 that you do have an opinion as to whether or not Tesla's stock price, strike that, are you stating in paragraph 11 that you do have an opinion that Mr. Tripp caused harm to Tesla's stock price by releasing information to the press?
No, I'm stating, I'm trying to opine what I said just a few moments ago in a prior answer. And as I think it says here, certain aspects of the harm to Tesla. I am not reaching the conclusion that it was in fact caused by that, but I am contributing to that discussion by showing quantifying the magnitude of the possible harm, and second, ruling out some other causes that normally would be considered as possible, but after an analysis reaching the conclusion that those are not influences. I then do not reach an ultimate opinion on that subject.
On page 6 of your report, paragraph 16, I strike that. Page 4 of your report, starting on page 4, paragraph 10, you reference some tweets published by Mr. Tripp on August 15th, 2018. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Do you have any opinion that those tweets caused any harm to Tesla in this case?
I do not.
Why is it in your report then?
I believe it's in a section called background. I believe it's, let me see if that is true. Yes, it is, because it's part of what was being alleged in the underlying case and
I'm sorry, in the what case?
in the underlying case.
So sitting here today, you're not, you are not claiming in this case that the August 15, 2018 tweets by Mr. Tripp caused any harm to Tesla, is that correct?
I have not analyzed that, so I don't have any opinion on that subject.
Did you ever investigate whether or not any of the vehicles with the VINs referenced in those tweets have a battery module that is punctured, dented, or damaged?
I have been informed they do not, but I have not done any investigation on my own and do not have an opinion.
Who informed you of that?
Counsel?
Other than the representations of counsel, you've never done any independent investigation as to whether or not the vehicles represented by the VINs in those August 15 tweets are damaged, punctured, or dented?
That's correct.
So for all you know, some or all of the vehicles on that list could have punctured, dented, or damaged battery modules, correct?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence and calls for speculation and expert opinion on which he's not an expert.
I don't have an opinion one way or the other, so I don't know anything in terms of actual facts that I'm aware of.
So let's look at the first category of damages, sir. Breach of loyalty. Are you an expert on employee loyalty?
No.
Did you perform any independent analysis of the evidence to determine whether or not Mr. Tripp's conduct constituted a breach of loyalty?
No.
The breach of loyalty is simply an assumption you took from the complaint and representations of counsel, correct?
Correct.
You'd agree with me that the complaint itself isn't evidence, it's just a series of allegations, correct?
Calls for a legal conclusion, but you can answer.
It is a legal question, but that's my understanding.
And as to the first category, I believe Exhibit 1 of your report is where you make an effort to quantify the damages in that first category. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And Exhibit 1, it's actually not numbered, but do you have Exhibit 1 to your report in front of you, sir?
I do.
Now, in Exhibit 1, there are 4 footnotes representing the sources for your calculations, starting with a Bates prefix of CNTL. Is that correct? What are those documents you're referencing there?
I'd have to go back and look, but I can't tell you item by item, but they are generally pay information for Mr. Tripp.
Okay. So in formulating the calculation represented at Exhibit 1, you looked at Mr. Tripp's pay information, correct?
Correct.
You looked at information about his rate of pay, is that correct?
Yes?
His rate of pay for regular pay, correct?
Correct.
For overtime,
Correct.
holidays,
Correct.
and paid time off, correct?
Correct.
And then as to each of those four pay rates,
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then I can't hear you. As to each of those four, if you want to pick up from there.
sure, and as to each of those four pay rates, you looked at a certain hours figure, is that correct?
I don't understand what try that again.
Well, column B of Exhibit 1 represents those four categories of pay rates, correct?
Well, there are only two different pay rates. There are four categories of pay, not of pay rates.
Well, thank you. There's four categories there in Exhibit B, correct?
Correct.
Three of the four all have the same pay rate of $28 an hour, correct?
Correct.
And then overtime is $42 an hour, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then column A, those are hours, correct?
Yes.
Am I to understand that column A represents the hours in each of those four categories, either worked or earned during the period of May 28 to June 19, 2018?
Correct.
Is it your opinion that Mr. Tripp did absolutely no work for Tesla between May 28th and June 19th, 2018?
No.
Exhibit 1 is entitled Martin Tripp Unearned Wages, correct?
Correct.
And if Mr. Tripp was doing some work for Tesla between May 28th and June 19th, 2018, how could all of those wages be unearned?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion. You can answer.
Because, as I've been informed and understand under the law, a breach of loyalty, if established, allows the entire wages during the period of breach of loyalty to be recovered, and thus this is that calculation.
And who gave you that understanding of the law?
We've already, you already asked me this, but as I said, counsel.
All right. But you, just so I want to be clear, sir, you've done no independent analysis as to whether or not Mr. Tripp was breaching his duty of loyalty to Tesla every hour of every workday of May 28th to June 19th. Is that correct?
I have not investigated his hour-by-hour behaviors.
Why did you pick the date range of May 28th to June 19th?
The easy answer is to say because that was what counsel instructed me were the relevant dates. But as I understand, June 19 is the day he ceased work, and May 28 is the first date at which it was clear, at least clear given the plaintiff's allegations, that he took actions adverse to Tesla.
Could you read that last answer back, please?
One moment, please. Answer. The easy answer is to say that that's what counsel instructed me were the relevant dates, but as I understand, June 19 is the day he ceased work, and May 28 is the first date at which it was clear, at least clear given the plaintiff's allegations, that he took actions adverse to Tesla.
What did Mr. Tripp do on May 28th that was adverse to Tesla?
As I sit here, I don't remember.
I think it's in, if he wants to find it, footnote 16.
Oh, thank you.
I think that's what he's looking for.
Yes, thank you. I knew it was here, I just couldn't find it. So, in any case, I have been informed that Mr. Tripp first contacted the press around May 27th, so I start the calculation the next day.
Are you testifying then that merely contacting the press constituted a breach of loyalty?
I'm not testifying anything about what is to be found improper. I'm telling you what date I used and why, and the finder of fact can decide that this is an appropriate date or not.
The only two press reports that factor into your expert report are the Business Insider articles published on June 4 and June 6 of 2018, correct?
In terms of what appeared in the press, I believe that's correct.
Do you know when Mr. Tripp first contacted the reporter from Business Insider, Ms. Lopez?
I do not-
Objection.
You can answer, sir.
I do not know that date. At least not as I sit here. I may have it somewhere, but I don't have it in my head.
And you said that June 19th was the day that he ceased working for Tesla, is that correct?
That's my recollection.
He was fired on that date, correct?
I believe so.
Suppose Tesla had waited 6 months to fire Mr. Tripp. Is it your testimony then that everything, every amount of wages that were earned in that 6-month period were in fact unearned because of the breach of loyalty?
Incomplete hypothetical.
I believe it's a legal question. I'll leave that to the lawyers. My understanding is this is an appropriate measure of damages, but that understanding comes from the lawyers, and I am merely quantifying what I understand to be the appropriate measure. I'm not opining about the whether that's the legal standard.
Well, I'm not asking you what the legal standard is. I'm saying just indulge the hypothetical that Tesla waited 6 months to fire Mr. Tripp. Would you then be opining that any pay he received during that 6 months would be forfeit because of the breach of loyalty?
Again, it's an incomplete hypothetical and calls for speculation.
And you've made it impossible for me to answer because your preface said I'm not asking you about the legal standard, yet the only possible answer is the legal standard. And so you've told me don't answer the question through the way you phrased the question.
Why can't you answer the question?
Because you told me I'm not asking about the legal standard, and the only reason that I would use that is because it is the legal standard. So I can't. So you've told me don't tell me the real reason.
Okay. Well, I'll change it then. You can use the legal standard again. Hypothetically, suppose Tesla had waited 6 months to terminate Mr. Tripp. Would all the pay he earned during that 6-month period be forfeit due to a breach of loyalty?
Again, it's an incomplete hypothetical, and now this time calls for a legal conclusion as to what the law allows.
I would do the calculation that I'm instructed is appropriate under the legal standard. My understanding is the legal standard I'm applying in this circumstance is correct. Whether there's a different legal standard if it's 6 months later or if it takes 6 months, I would leave to the lawyers, and I would implement whichever calculation is called for based on what I'm informed the law is.
You used the word instructed. Who's instructing you to make these calculations?
Counsel has told me what the law is, and then I have implemented it. Implemented the calculations under what I've been informed the law is.
On footnote 8 of your report, you note that Mr. Tripp was being interviewed by Tesla investigators on June 14 and June 15. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's obviously within your May 28th to June 19th window, correct?
Correct.
And those interviews occurred while Mr. Tripp was still a Tesla employee, correct?
Yes.
Right. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Tripp was uncooperative during those interviews?
I have no evidence either for or against that proposition.
But you're still accepting the proposition supplied to you by counsel that he was being disloyal to Tesla during that time period?
I'm assuming that that is what they will establish as their complaint alleges.
In looking at page 5 of your report, paragraph 12, sir, you state, in conducting my analysis, I necessarily assume that Tesla's allegations are true and that Tesla prevails on its claims against Mr. Tripp. Is that correct?
Yes.
So for your entire report, you never conducted any independent analysis to determine whether or not Tesla's allegations were true. Is that correct?
Correct. That's outside the scope of my work and probably my competence.
So let's go back to Exhibit 1, if we could, sir.
Oh.
Exhibit 1 to your report. Thank you.
Yes.
Apologies for the confusion. So again, we have 4 categories of compensation: regular wages, overtime, holidays, and paid time off, correct?
Yes.
And as to each of those 4 categories, you took the hours in column A and multiplied them by the pay rate in column B, correct?
Yes.
And that gives you essentially a column C, which represents a cost. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the cost is how you quantify, as to each category of pay, the damages associated with Mr. Tripp's alleged breach of loyalty?
Correct.
So you're just really taking 2 numbers and multiplying them together. Is that correct?
For each row, that's correct, and then adding down the rows.
Right. Simple arithmetic, correct?
Once you know what you're going to do, the calculations themselves are simple arithmetic, yes.
Okay. I mean, do you have any kids?
I do?
Do you have any grandkids?
No.
All right.
Which I've complained about repeatedly.
Fair to say that this is the type of arithmetic that, say, a 4th grader could do?
Objection argumentative.
Within reason, I don't remember when you get to thousands columns, somewhere along the way. The arithmetic itself is not complicated. The decision on what to do the arithmetic on is slightly more complicated, but this is not a complicated analysis.
Tesla told you what to do the arithmetic on, correct?
Objection misstates prior testimony.
No, Tesla told me the relevant dates and that compensation during that period is relevant. They didn't tell me anything beyond that.
Right, but Tesla supplied to you the hours in column A, correct?
Only in the sense that the documents that were produced had the information. They didn't say, here are, here we want you to use 120 hours for the first column. They merely said, here are the pay stubs.
Okay, so they gave you a pay stub that had that information in column A, correct? Or Tesla's counsel gave you pay stubs that represent the hours in column A, correct?
Yes, in aggregate, plural, yes.
And did those pay stubs also reflect the pay rate in column B?
Yes.
Okay, so, but as to Exhibit 1 of your report, it's a simple matter of multiplying column A times column B to get column C, correct?
Misstates prior testimony.
Once you know what things you're going to multiply, the result is just A times B, and then, of course, you have to add down the column. But yes, that's what the calculation is.
Okay. If those pay stubs are in evidence, is that a calculation the jury could make on their own?
Could, perhaps, will. I mean, I have many times been a witness on things that are essentially just arithmetic, but it's a compilation of other documents, and the documents, despite what lawyers often say, the documents do not speak for themselves. And so I am often a mouthpiece for relatively simple calculations that come from documents and evidence. And for this particular calculation, I think it falls in that same category.
All right. But as far as the documents that you used for these figures in Exhibit 1, was there anything other than Mr. Tripp's pay stubs?
I'd have to go back to the 4 documents. I don't remember anything, but I wouldn't want to say it with certainty without going back and checking.
Did you use anything other than documents that simply gave you Mr. Tripp's rate of pay and the hours that he had worked between May 28th and June 19th?
For the actual numerical entries, I don't believe so.
Let's go on to Category 2, out-of-pocket costs. And I'm looking at paragraph 14 of your report, sir.
Yes?
It states, Tesla's out-of-pocket costs come in 2 forms. First, Tesla hired Nisos Group, LLC, to investigate the identity of the employee that was the source of the information contained in the 2 Business Insider articles mentioned above. Second, Tesla employees devoted valuable time to this investigation as well. Did I read that correctly, sir?
You did.
Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as deposition exhibits 3 and 4. Just for clarity's sake, are those the two Business Insider articles that are referenced in paragraph 14 of your expert report?
It would appear so.
It's my understanding one of these articles was published online on June 4 and the other was published on June 6th of last year.
I can't tell if it's your understanding. I mean,
Well, is that your understanding?
yes.
But going back to paragraph 14, you basically break the out-of-pocket damages into two subcategories. The first one being costs associated with Nisos Group to investigate the identity of the employee that was the source of the information contained in the two Business Insider articles, correct?
Correct?
And what is Nisos Group?
And firm of investigators?
Have you ever worked with them before?
No.
And the Nisos expenses are summarized in Exhibit 2 to your report, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you interview anybody from the Nisos Group in preparing your report?
I did not.
And in terms of documents that you relied on for these calculations in Exhibit 2, what kind of documents did you rely on?
Generally speaking, there were two categories. First, some underlying expense and, well, I'll call them expense records, whether they're credit card statements or invoices or receipts or whatever they happen to be. And second, summaries of those documents that were, I understand, prepared by someone at Nisos, though there happened to be some calculation errors and duplications on those because when we checked them against the source documents, we found some errors. And that's why my numbers are slightly different than those summary schedules, though they're not off by much.
Okay. And so when you say summaries prepared, well, do you know who prepared those summaries?
I don't know what the person's name is or anything like that.
But did those summaries come in the form of spreadsheets?
Yes, I believe you could call it a spreadsheet. That's what I would certainly call it that.
Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 5. I'll represent to you that that is a printout of the native form of the document that you identify as CNTL 00779388. Do you recognize that document?
I do.
Is that one of the documents, one of the summaries you considered in preparing Exhibit 2? I'm sorry, Allison.
Yes.
Now, according to this spreadsheet at Exhibit 5, the first category of expenses is a BI leak investigation. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you know what the BI stands for?
I did once. I don't remember right now.
And the expenses associated with the BI leak investigation appear to be a calculation of hours expended at a certain hourly rate by some of the investigators on the team. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there's a date range there from June 18th to June 23, correct?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Tripp was interviewed on June 14, correct?
I believe that's correct. I
So-
can't remember. I think there were 2 days. Maybe that was one of the 2 days.
Well, if I could, sir, direct your attention to,
Footnote 16, I think it was. Was that right? No, that's not right.
footnote 8 of your report.
Yes.
And according to footnote 8 of your report, Mr. Tripp was interviewed by Tesla investigators on June 14 and 15 of 2018, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
All right. And at least according to your footnote here, Mr. Tripp admitted during these interviews to, quote, collecting confidential and proprietary information from Tesla's manufacturing operating system and to transferring that information to entities outside the company, correct?
Yes.
Do you know what entities outside the company that information was transmitted to?
Well, certainly Business Insider is one of them. I do not know if there were others.
But you'd agree with me that by June 14, Tesla knew that Mr. Tripp was the one that had given the information to Business Insider, correct?
They knew that Mr. Tripp was at least one of the people who was involved in giving information. I don't know whether they had concluded he was the only one at that point.
Okay, but they had identified Mr. Tripp as the, quote, leaker, correct?
At least a leaker, whether it's the leaker or not, I don't have an opinion on whether they knew that or not. I just do not know.
Okay. Well, do you have any information that Tesla was looking at other individuals as possible leakers?
Calls for speculation.
I don't have any information I can cite to you. I believe I became aware that Tesla was concerned that there were other people possibly involved at some point in this process. I can't tell you when or who or any details. That was just something I think I heard along the way.
Well, but looking at paragraph 14 of your report, it says, first, Tesla hired Nisos Group to investigate the identity of the employee, singular, that was the source of the information contained in the two Business Insider articles. So according to your report, Nisos Group was tasked to investigate the identity of the, quote, employee that had given the information to Business Insider, correct?
I think you're reading way too much into it. I have no basis on which to state that it was an employee singular, nor whether that was known earlier. This is just my brief summary. We now know with hindsight it was one employee, so that's how I wrote it.
But you'd agree with me that by June 14, Mr. Tripp had been identified as an employee that had given the information that was in the two Business Insider articles, correct?
I'm going to quibble just a little bit because I don't know if that was on June 14 or June 15 because I don't know whether, I'm not disagreeing, I really don't know, so I can't confirm it. Certainly by June 15, when the interviews concluded, it may very well be on June 14 they knew.
Okay. But you can say here conclusively that by June 15th, at the end of the interview, Tesla knew that Mr. Tripp was the employee that had given the information that was in those two Business Insider articles, correct?
I can't testify that that's true. I can testify that's my understanding.
Okay. So, going back to Exhibit 5, the first category, BI leak investigation. There's a date range in there of June 18 to June 23, correct?
Yes.
Now, if, at least based on your information, Tesla knew the identity of the employee that gave the information to Business Insider on June 15th, why was it necessary to investigate the identity of the employee that gave the information to Business Insider on June 18 to June 23?
I can't say, nor can I even say whether those dates are a proper description of what the time period was.
So you've done no independent investigation as to what work the investigate, strike that, you've done no independent analysis of the investigatory work that Nisos Group did, is that correct?
That's correct.
If that's the case, then how do you know that all of the expenses reflected in Exhibit 2 to your report were to investigate the identity of the employee that was the source of the information contained in the 2 Business Insider articles?
Essentially, representation, that is what the evidence will show, that this entire NISOS analysis was related to this issue.
Okay. And when you say representation, again, that's representation by Tesla's counsel?
As to what the evidence will show, yes.
Other than the information given to you by Tesla's counsel, do you have any independent basis to conclude that the expenses in Exhibit 2 to your report were all related to investigating the identity of the employee that was the source of the information contained in the 2 Business Insider articles?
Well, first, I think you may be describing it too narrowly, but I don't know because I didn't investigate it. But I believe it was related to the leak itself, not necessarily just to the employee. There could be other things, and I'm not going to tell you what they are because I don't know. All I'm saying is an investigation of a leak is not necessarily limited solely to identifying the employee. Could be questions about process, could be questions about who else was involved, and I don't know that. I'm not opining that any of that happened, merely that it need not be as constrained as your question suggests.
Right. But according to paragraph 14 of your report, Tesla hired NISOS Group to investigate the identity of the employee that was the source of the information contained in the 2 Business Insider articles, correct?
As a summary, without knowing what the actual assignment was, I'm not quoting anything, that's correct.
Other than the representations given to you by Tesla's counsel, how do you know that any of the expenses reflected in Exhibit 2 to your report are even related to this case?
The mere fact that this document was prepared. Now, I grant that it's not, well, let me back up. It's not merely a representation of plaintiff's counsel that this was done. The documents themselves are assembled by an outsider, NISOS Group. I understand that's in response to a request for the total amount expended in connection with this investigation. Again, I understand that assertion comes through plaintiff's counsel, but it's not simply done without any documentation. There was documentation, and that's part of what I reviewed.
And you never interviewed anybody from NISOS, correct?
Correct.
When was the complaint filed in this case?
I don't remember.
Would you accept my representation that the complaint was filed by Tesla on June 20 of 2018?
If you say so, I will accept that.
How do you know that the expenses in Exhibit 2 aren't just simply regular pre-litigation investigation?
I'm not sure what the distinction is. I understand that these, and I'm relying on the fact that the assertion that the evidence will show that these are related to the investigation and the issues that are before the court here. I have not validated that, and I accept that that will have to come from other evidence.
All right. Did the NISOS Group interview any witnesses?
They interviewed people. I don't know whether they are witnesses.
So your understanding is NISOS Group interviewed people in conjunction with its investigation, correct?
Yes.
All right. Hypothetically, if Tesla's counsel interviewed people in conjunction with this case, would that be damages that you would claim in your report?
I'm not claiming damages. I'm doing a calculation that I understand the evidence will show is an appropriate measure of damages. So I assert that they are damages based on the representation that these expenditures are, in fact, what they purport to be.
It sounds to me like, with regard to the second category, at least with regard to NISOS, you did something similar to what you did in the first category, in the sense that you took numbers that were provided to you in documents from Tesla's counsel, and you added those numbers up, correct?
Misstates the expert report and prior testimony.
I took information that was provided to me. I went through it to validate it, see if it's correct, found errors, and fixed them, and compiled the results on the assumption and understanding that the documents I was looking at were costs that are relevant to the claim for the investigation's cost.
How did you determine that all the costs reflected in Exhibit 2 were relevant?
I think I just said that. That is the representation that that's what the evidence will show.
So you made no independent determination as to whether or not all the costs reflected in Exhibit 2 are actually relevant?
I did not confirm them. I did do sort of a smell test in the sense that they all appear in the same time period. They all appear documented in the spreadsheet that you've marked as Exhibit 5. They all appear to be related, but I'm not testifying that they're all related to this investigation because I think that the people who, that evidence has to come from others. It has to come from those who were involved.
Are you an expert in leak investigations?
No.
Sitting here today, can you tell me whether or not the rates charged by the Nisos group were reasonable?
I cannot.
Sitting here today, can you tell me whether or not the amount of time spent by the Nisos investigators was reasonable?
I cannot.
Are you aware that some of the travel reflected in the expenses in Exhibit 2 to your report occurred in July?
Yes.
And on what basis do you conclude that travel done by the Nisos investigators in July is relevant to determining the identity of Mr. Tripp?
Well, I keep saying I think that's too narrow a categorization. But setting that aside, it's the same answer I've given you 3 or 4 times already. My understanding is the evidence will show that these costs are all related to the investigation related to this leak, and that is what I've attempted to compile.
Right. But even though paragraph 14 of your report states that Nisos was hired to investigate the identity of the employee, your testimony now is that Nisos was hired to generally investigate the leak?
I wasn't there. I'll go back to what I said before, which I think is still true. My understanding is the evidence will show that these costs are related to amounts that are properly and legally claimable by Tesla in connection with its investigation of this leak. And that I'm doing my analysis on that basis.
All right. Well, sir, you have no idea what the evidence will show in this case. You're just assuming what the evidence will show based on what Tesla's counsel has told you, correct?
That's how I answered you just a moment ago. I said, it's my understanding that the evidence will show that. I'm not the one putting forth that evidence.
But again, you compiled information from spreadsheets and receipts, and you added them together to get the numbers reflected in Exhibit 2 to your report, correct?
Objection, misstates prior testimony.
I did that in addition to validating things, checking to see that they're accurate. Some of the other things that had to be done because the spreadsheets that I got were not accurate.
So you cross-referenced the spreadsheets that you were provided from Tesla's counsel to make sure that they were accurate as compared to the actual receipts and underlying documents, correct?
Correct, just because there could be misunderstanding. You said provided by Tesla's counsel. You're correct in the sense that the documents were transmitted through counsel, but they were not prepared by counsel. And the question could go either way, so I just clarify that.
So if you look at a receipt from the Renaissance Hotel in Reno, obviously Tesla's counsel didn't prepare that, correct?
Right, but all I'm saying is Tesla's counsel didn't prepare the summary spreadsheet either.
How do you know that?
That's my understanding, and that's plus I don't think most counsel prepare spreadsheets of that sort.
Right, but how do you know counsel didn't prepare the spreadsheet at Exhibit 5?
I have been informed it was prepared by the Nisos folks.
Okay, so with respect to Exhibit 2 to your report, you took information from spreadsheets prepared by Nisos Group and receipts supplied by Nisos Group, cross-referenced them for accuracy, and then you added those numbers up, correct?
Misstates prior testimony.
compiled them with the proviso that I was informed that that these are the expenses that are relevant to the investigation, yes.
Actually, I need one of those back, sorry.
Thought maybe it might be 2 exhibits.
I'm feeling generous today. Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 6. These are documents with the CNTL Bates prefix, series of 380 to 388. I believe that's the documents that are referenced in footnote 1 to Exhibit 2 to your report.
They are, but I don't think they're complete because 388 had many more pages than this.
Well, 388 was prepared in its native format.
Right. All I'm saying is this is not a full printout of 388.
Well, do you know what was contained in 388?
I don't know with specificity, but I know it had more than just what's here.
.388 was a spreadsheet that had several tabs on it, compiling the expenses incurred by NISOS, correct?
I believe that's correct. I don't have it in front of me to confirm that, but that's my recollection.
And in fact, Exhibit 5 is the first tab of that spreadsheet that summarizes all the expenses, correct?
Correct. I'm just pointing out that 388 has more than the first tab, and I believe only the first tab is reflected in Exhibit 6.
Okay, but the other tabs to 388 are simply compilations of expenses claimed by the NISOS group in their investigation, correct?
I can't confirm that sitting here because I know it includes that, but I don't have it memorized, and I don't have it in front of me.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, I'll let you look at my computer right now so you can look at it.
Okay, I have now looked at it.
Okay.
So I don't remember what the question was.
So the question was that the native form of 388, it's an Excel spreadsheet with 6 tabs. The first tab is reflected in Exhibit 5, correct?
Yes.
And the other 5 tabs are calculations of expenses associated with the individual investigators, Jake, Willis, Scott, Ryan, and Justin, correct?
Yes.
All right. And those 5 spreadsheets or 5 tabs for those investigators, they all filter into the summary reflected in Exhibit 5, correct?
For better or worse, yes. They're not accurate in all cases.
Understood. Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 7.
Will, do you have is that mine?
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
And sir, are these the documents that are referenced in footnote 2 to Exhibit 2 to your report?
Based on the Bates numbers, they appear to be, yes.
Okay, and those are Bates numbers with the prefix CNTL. Last 3 number digits are 390 through 398. Is that correct?
Correct.
And, sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 8. Do the documents in Exhibit 8 correspond with the documents referenced in footnote 3 of Exhibit 2 to your report?
Based on just the first and last Bates number, it appears the answer is yes.
Okay. So, with respect to the Exhibits 5, 6, 7, and 8, they are comprised of either spreadsheets provided by the NISOS group or receipts supplied by the NISOS group that you have been advised were relevant to the investigation, correct?
Yes.
All right. And other than the information that I've given you at Exhibits 5, 6, 7, and 8, you didn't consider any other data or information in the calculations at Exhibit 2, is that correct?
That is correct.
Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibits 9 and 10. Again, just for purposes of having a good record here, do Exhibits 9 and 10 comprise the documents referenced in the 4 footnotes to Exhibit 1 to your report?
Would you have an extra copy of Exhibit 10? Oh, it's this one?
Yeah, there it is.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. So Exhibits 9 and 10 reflect the entirety of the documents that you relied upon for your calculations in Exhibit 1. Is that correct?
The underlying source materials, yes.
Will, whenever convenient, could we take a break?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's take a break.
We are off the record at 10:59 a.m. We are back on the record at 11:12 a.m.
Sir, we were discussing the expenses claimed by the NISOS group in investigating the purported leak by Mr. Tripp. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it your opinion that Mr. Tripp caused those expenses to be incurred?
I don't think I have an opinion about causation, but I think as a layperson, I'd say the answer is yes. But it's not an expert opinion. I'm not opining about it from an expert standpoint.
Okay. So you'd agree with me that a layperson could draw the conclusion that Mr. Tripp caused those expenses to be incurred, correct?
Well, presumably a layperson could draw any conclusion they want. I mean, but I'm not opining about causation in connection with those expenses other than to note that they are related to the investigation that found him and that this lawsuit's about.
Right, but a jury doesn't need your expert opinion to conclude, if they so chose to do, that the expenses incurred by the NISOS group were caused by Mr. Tripp. Is that correct?
Objection. Calls for a legal conclusion and speculation.
I don't know if the jury needs that or not. I am not opining about causation. I'm opining that these are the total amount of expenses incurred in connection with this investigation.
By NISOS group?
Yes.
Okay. Still sticking with the second category of out-of-pocket damages, you also looked at time incurred by Tesla employees investigating Mr. Tripp. Is that correct?
Correct.
Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as deposition exhibits 11, 12, and 13. Do those correspond with the documents identified in footnotes 1 through 3 to Exhibit 3 to your report?
Yes.
And that's pay information for 3 Tesla employees, Nicholas Jacinto, Imari Henderson, and Andrew Lindemulder.
Yes.
And you examined time spent or allegedly spent by these 3 employees in investigating Mr. Tripp as part of the second category of damages. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in Exhibits 11, 12, and 13, that's just information related to either the salary or hourly wage paid to those 3 employees. Is that correct?
Can you start your question again or repeat it?
Certainly. Exhibits 11, 12, and 13 reflect wage information for those 3 employees, correct?
Among other things, yes.
Wage and salary information, correct?
Yes, among other information, but yes, that's on there.
Exhibits 11, 12, and 13 do not reflect how much time these employees claim to have spent investigating Mr. Tripp. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You obtained that information by interviewing those 3 employees, correct?
Correct.
And if I could direct your attention, sir, to paragraph 16 of your report, that's where you list the hours that each employee claimed they had spent investigating Mr. Tripp. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I'm going to read from paragraph 16. I learned that Nicholas Jacinto, Senior Manager of Global Security Response, spent 228 hours. Imari Henderson, who was at that time HR business partner, conservatively estimated that he spent 17 hours. And Andrew Lindemulder, who was at that time desktop support lead, conservatively estimated that he spent approximately 60 hours. Did I read that correct?
You did.
And that's based on a phone interview that you did with these individuals on November 2nd, is that right?
Correct.
Now, with respect to Mr. Henderson and Mr. Lindemulder, you state that they each conservatively estimated the time that they spent, is that right?
Correct.
I don't see either the word conservative or estimated with respect to Mr. Jacinto. Did he provide anything to you, like documentation validating the time he'd spent investigating Mr. Tripp?
He did not provide me such documentation, but he described to me that he had such documentation, and that is how he compiled his total number of hours spent.
Okay. So you've never reviewed that documentation, correct?
I have not.
And you never undertook any independent investigation to confirm whether or not those 3 employees did in fact spend that amount of time investigating Mr. Tripp, have you?
I did not do anything other than the interviews themselves on that issue.
Is there any reason you omitted the phrase conservatively estimated with respect to Mr. Jacinto when you used it with regard to the other 2 employees?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because Mr. Jacinto thought he was being quite accurate, and the other 2 said, I can't be accurate, so I asked them to be conservative. In other words, they would go back to their records, and if they couldn't be comfortable or confident that an hour they were accounting for was related to the investigation, they excluded it. Whereas Mr. Jacinto had more detailed information and enabled him to do what he concluded was an accurate calculation.
Did Mr. Jacinto tell you on which dates or date ranges he was investigating Mr. Tripp?
I mean, the discussion was more than 6 months ago, or not more, approximately 6 months ago, so I don't recall it with great specificity. He did talk about dates, but I didn't go through it day by day and go through his calendar with him, but he did, generally speaking, talk about dates.
Did Mr. Henderson or Mr. Lindemulder give you specific dates on which they were investigating Mr. Tripp?
I think, again, my recollection is they talk about the range of dates, but they didn't tell me a number of hours on a daily basis. They had that information compiled, but I asked them for the totals.
I think we established earlier that the complaint in this case was filed on June 20th of 2018. Do you know how much of the time spent by these 3 employees occurred after the complaint was filed?
I do not.
And in terms of your statement that Mr. Henderson and Mr. Lindemulder gave you conservative estimates, that's just based on the fact you told them to give you a conservative estimate?
Well, and the fact that they responded to me in a way that indicated that's what they did. In other words, it's not simply I told them and they ignored it. They described their process, and I concurred that that was a process that would lead to a conservative estimate.
Okay. But again, you didn't review any timesheets or notes or other documents other than the documents referenced at Exhibits 11, 12, and 13 in making the calculation in Exhibit 3 to your report?
Correct. I did not personally review them, but as I described, I asked them for their process, which they described as including a review of things like timesheets if they had them, calendar, their personal calendar entries, things of that sort, travel records that enabled them to track their time and only include time that they were certain was involved with this investigation.
Do you have any opinion as to whether or not the information provided to you by Jacinto, Henderson, or Lindemulder was accurate?
I'm obviously relying on their representations as to their process, but given their process, the process seemed an appropriate way to come up with an accurate but conservative estimate. But I did not go in and audit their underlying records.
Right. But do you have an opinion as to whether or not the information they furnished to you was accurate?
Well, I think I was answering that essentially. Given what I've done, the answer is yes, but there are things I could have done. For example, if I took their spreadsheet and redid their arithmetic, I may be able to check something. But I didn't do that. Given what I did and my discussions, I've reached the conclusion that they were doing things in a process that should lead to an accurate and conservative estimate.
And with the Nissos group, you took their spreadsheets, you took the underlying receipts, and you did check their arithmetic and actually found some errors, correct?
Correct.
Why didn't you do that same process with respect to Jacinto, Henderson, and Lindemulder?
I understand that they will be witnesses, or at least their evidence will come in some other way, and so I just didn't.
Okay. So you'd agree with me that Jacinto, Henderson, and Lindemulder could all testify at trial how much time they claim to have spent investigating Mr. Tripp?
I expect they will.
in terms of how you came up with the dollar calculations in Exhibit 3 of your report, with Linda Mulder, you just took the 60 hours that he gave you and you multiplied it by his hourly compensation of $33. Is that correct?
Objection misstates the report in the exhibit.
Well, after my discussions with him, and that I already went through about how I would arrive at those number of hours and how I asked him to arrive at those number of hours, and my discussions confirming the appropriateness of the process, I then took those number of hours and multiplied it by what I determined to be his hourly compensation to do the calculation that's on the third line of Exhibit 3.
Focusing on the mathematical computation, you took the number 60, you multiplied it by the number 33, and you came up with a figure of $1,980, correct?
Yes, once you get through the decisions I had to go through to get to those numbers, that is the mathematical portion of the calculation.
Okay, well, so help me understand those decisions. One, you determined what Mr. Linda Mulder's hourly rate of pay was, correct?
I did.
And you gleaned that from one of those exhibits that you have in front of you, correct?
I did.
All right, which exhibit is it? Is it, I might have mismarked mine. Which exhibit has Linda Mulder on it?
12.
All right. So, Exhibit 12 provides to you his rate of pay of $33 an hour. Is that correct?
For that time period, yes. It has other rates for other time periods, so I had to pick the right time period.
Well, it appears he received a pay increase to $33 an hour on November 27th of 2017?
Correct.
All right. So at least we can identify that the work he did occurred after November 27 of 2017 if you're using a $33 an hour pay rate?
Correct.
So in terms of the decisions, again, with respect to Linda Mulder, you identified the hourly rate on Exhibit 12, correct?
I did.
And then you multiplied that number times the 60-hour figure that he gave to you, correct?
Correct.
The 60-hour figure that you took no effort to independently verify, correct?
Objection argumentative and misstates prior testimony.
Yeah, and not true. I talked to you about what I did to validate it. I did not go and audit the underlying documents, but I had both instructions to him as to how to compile it, and discussion with him about how he compiled it and judge whether that comported with what I would consider to be an appropriate process to go through.
So the only source of information you had to assume that Mr. Linda Mulder had spent 60 hours on this investigation was your interview with him, correct?
Yes, and what I learned from that interview.
And you took the number learned in that interview and you multiplied it times 33 to get a total of 1,980, correct?
Ultimately, that's correct.
All right. Now, with respect to Jacinto and Henderson, they were salaried employees, correct?
Correct.
So according to your report, you, quote, valued their hours as their salary multiplied by the proportion of their annual time worked that was spent on this matter. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have any opinion sitting here today as to whether or not Jacinto and Henderson were paid a reasonable salary?
I'll assume it, but I haven't gone out to analyze it.
All right. And do you have any opinion sitting here today as to whether or not Linda Mulder was being paid a reasonable wage of $33 an hour when he was doing this investigation?
Again, I assume it, but I did not go out and independently investigate it.
So with respect to Jacinto and Henderson, you calculated an effective hourly compensation rate, is that correct?
Yes.
Based on the typical hours they work in the week and their annual compensation, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you did that by, how did you get, in column D here, for example, for Jacinto, you came up with an effective hourly rate of $44 an hour. How did you arrive at that number?
By dividing their annual compensation by their typical weekly hours worked.
So you arrived at the $44 an hour effective hourly rate by dividing $160,000 by 70?
Correct.
All right. And then with Jacinto, you then took the 228 hours, multiplied it times 44, and you got $9,995, correct?
Correct.
All right. Do you think that's a mathematical calculation a layperson could make?
Anyone can do the arithmetic. It's not a question of the mechanics. It's a question of the decisions to do it. Most of my calculations anyone could do. The value comes from deciding to do them, and that applies to a huge amount of what I do. So I think that the mechanics are not the question as to whether there's reasoned professional judgment being involved.
Help me walk through the decisions you made. You made a decision to interview Jacinto, correct?
Yes.
All right. Jacinto, to your understanding at least, is going to testify, correct?
Or the evidence will come in some fashion. I don't know how.
There'll be either documentary or witness testimony indicating that Mr. Jacinto spent 228 hours investigating Mr. Tripp. Is that your understanding?
Somehow the evidence will come in, yes.
Okay. And your next decision was to come up with an effective hourly compensation rate by dividing $160,000 by 70, correct?
I had to do that, yes.
All right. And your final decision was to multiply 228 by $44 to get the $9,995, correct?
Those are the mechanical steps, correct. That's not the entire process. You have to decide to do those things. But yes, those are the mechanical steps.
What other decisions did you make?
Well, I had to decide that the right thing to do was to use annual compensation. I had to decide the right thing to do was to leave out things like Social Security benefits or other things, and I did that on a conservative basis. I had to decide that the right thing to do was to look at the total number of weekly hours worked as opposed to, for example, a 40-hour work week, and make judgments as to whether those are the ways that I would go about computing this to get to a reasonable estimate of the value.
Sitting here today, do you have an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Tripp caused Jacinto, Henderson, and Linda Mulder to spend the time indicated on Exhibit 3 to your report?
I think yes, in the sense that they were a reasonable reaction to the concerns that Tesla had about what was going on.
And you don't know when this investigation work took place, is that correct?
Not as I sit here. I did at the time, but I don't have it memorized, and I don't remember.
How would you differentiate the work that Jacinto, Henderson, and Linda Mulder did from the typical pretrial investigation that is part of any case?
I understand this was related to this investigation before there was a case, or at least not only before, because clearly on the day they knew about him, they didn't stop doing whatever they had to do. But my understanding is that, and they will have to testify as to how they drew the line, but my understanding is that this is separate from pretrial investigation, and it does not include costs from numerous other Tesla employees, including counsel, that are not in my calculations.
Well, you said there all this investigation by Jacinto, Henderson, and Linda Mulder occurred, quote, before there was a case. Is that what you said, sir?
No, I don't know that because I don't know the dates.
Okay, so you don't know when their investigative work occurred, do you?
Well, I know. I don't have it. I don't know as I sit here today. I knew at the time I did the interviews, but I don't have it memorized and cannot tell you.
So sitting here today, you can't tell me how much of that work occurred before or after the filing of the complaint on June 20, 2018?
That's correct. I can't as I sit here today.
Right. And are you, when you say before there was a case, what's the line in the sand you're giving me in terms of when there is a case?
I'm not giving you a line in the sand.
Well, again, typically before a party files a lawsuit, they do some type of investigation as to the underlying facts, correct?
I will presume that.
Well, I mean, how long have you been an expert witness for, sir?
38 years.
All right. So, in your experience, typically, counsel or people working for counsel will investigate the underlying facts of a matter before filing a complaint if they're on the plaintiff's side, correct?
I am rarely involved before a complaint is filed, so I actually, while I believe that's totally reasonable, rational, and expected, I actually cannot testify to that.
So, again, help me understand how it is that you can reach the conclusion that the work that Jacinto Henderson and Linda Mulder did is any different than, say, for example, investigatory work that Tesla's attorneys did in preparation for drafting the complaint in this case?
Well, to at least some extent. I will not tell you how much. We've already established I don't remember the dates. A lot of this was done before they even knew who Mr. Tripp was,
How do you know that?
because they've told me that.
I thought you said you didn't know what the dates were.
I don't, but I know they said that.
How much of the work did they do before they identified Mr. Tripp?
I can't tell you.
Do you think that determining the identity of Mr. Tripp, would that also just be part of regular pretrial investigation in anticipation of filing a complaint?
Calls for speculation.
I do not know.
Tesla thought they had a leaker, correct?
Yes,
Right. Tesla wanted to find the leaker, correct?
yes,
All right. Tesla wanted to find the leaker and potentially bring suit against the leaker, correct?
I
Calls for
couldn't say.
speculation.
I mean,
I'm sorry, calls for speculation?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I couldn't say.
So you don't know whether or not the investigation done by Jacinto Henderson and Linda Mulder before Mr. Tripp's identity was discovered related to pre-litigation activities, do you?
Objection misstates prior testimony.
I mean, by definition, it's pre-litigation. It happened
That's a
before
bad
the
question.
litigation.
That's a fair answer. It's a bad question. You can't tell me whether or not the investigation by Jacinto Henderson and Linda Mulder was done for the purpose of identifying the leaker so that Tesla could bring a lawsuit against them, can you?
I believe it's the first part's probably true. It was done to identify the leaker, at least in large part. The reason I can't testify about Tesla's underlying reasons.
So sitting here today, you cannot tell me whether or not, I'll strike that. Jacinto Henderson and Linda Mulder were tasked with discovering the identity of the leaker so that Tesla could sue that leaker. True or false?
I don't-
Objection calls for speculation.
I don't know.
I see the same thing with Nisos Group. Nisos Group was tasked with identifying the leaker so that Tesla could sue that leaker. True or false?
Again, it calls for speculation.
I wouldn't know.
How much of the time spent by Jacinto Henderson and Linda Mulder was dedicated to identifying the identity of Mr. Tripp versus conducting other investigative work regarding Mr. Tripp?
Objection vague and ambiguous.
I don't have any way to answer that question.
Well, obviously, Tesla identified the leaker as Mr. Tripp, correct?
Yes.
But there's other investigative activity that occurred other than identifying Mr. Tripp, correct?
For example, I don't know.
Part of your calculus includes approximately $140,000 spent by the Nisos Group after the identity of Mr. Tripp was discovered. What were they doing?
You'll have to ask them.
But you'd agree with me that some of the investigative activity in this case was dedicated to something other than merely identifying Mr. Tripp, correct?
Yes, I mean, but I don't think simply identifying ends any investigation. In other words, you can know the person's name without knowing what they did, not knowing the extent of which they did it, not knowing how they did it, without knowing who else they talked to. All of that is something you might do after you have an identity. So I don't think an investigation is properly limited to simply finding a name and stopping.
Are you an expert on investigations?
Some investigations, yes, and some no.
Are you an expert in terms of leaker investigations like the one that occurred in this case?
Not for that kind of a category, probably.
Let me put it to you this way. Would you agree with me that there's a difference between investigating who the leaker was versus investigating the alleged misconduct by Mr. Tripp?
Incomplete hypothetical.
I don't know.
You don't know if there's a difference between those two?
No, I mean, nor what the implications of that difference are, if there are any. I mean, is it just two ways to say the same thing? I can't tell.
Well, it's one thing to identify who the leaker is, correct?
As opposed to, I mean, I can agree with you, but I don't know what the rest of the question is.
As opposed to determining maybe what other things the leaker might have done, how the leaker obtained their information, who the information might have been shared with. Those are things above and beyond the simple identity of the leaker, correct?
Probably. I mean, but I don't think knowing that someone is a leaker would ever end your inquiry.
Right. The inquiry doesn't stop with just identifying who the leaker was, correct?
That would be my expectation.
All right. And so, again, with respect to both Nisos and Jacinto, Henderson, and Linda Mulder, do you know how much of their time was spent merely identifying the leaker versus investigating other aspects of what Mr. Tripp did?
I do not.
I'm going to go back to Exhibit 5.
Which Exhibit 5? Mine or yours?
Well, I'm sorry, Deposition Exhibit 5. Thank you for clarifying that. References a BG report. Do you know what that is?
What the actual report itself consisted of, I do not.
Did you look at that BG report?
I did not.
Do you know what do you even know what the letters BG stands for?
I think background, although if somebody tells me I'm wrong, so be it.
Let's assume that it was a background check on, or a background report on Mr. Tripp. You believe that's an appropriate item of damages to claim in this case?
Based on what I've been informed, the law is yes.
Any other basis for that assumption?
No.
Exhibit 5 also indicates that equipment was purchased. Do you know what that equipment was?
I don't think it says equipment. Oh, it does say equipment. I'm sorry. Down at the. But it doesn't. While it says the word equipment purchase, I think that is probably merely a category, because I think it is the two forensics kits, and I don't know if they are. How much of them is hardware as opposed to software? So I think you have to include all of that in your question somehow.
So there were two forensics kits apparently purchased by Nisos Group, correct?
Well, one called a forensics kit and one called a forensics package, and I do not know what the difference is.
Understood. And I believe you relied on some invoices showing the purchase price for those two kits. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you know whether or not they're software, hardware, or a combination of the two?
I looked at the invoices a long time ago. I recall there was at least some software, or at least I think I recall that, but I don't recall what else was on there.
Do you know whether or not those kits were even used in the investigation?
Other than they were charged to the investigation, I can't say anything else about them.
Can a representative from the Nisos Group testify at trial as to the expenses that they incurred in support of the investigation of Mr. Tripp?
I'll leave that to you and the other lawyers as to whether they can do that.
Well, it's a yes or no question, sir. Can a Nisos representative testify to the amount of time and money that they spent investigating Mr. Tripp?
Objection, it calls for a legal conclusion, and it's an incomplete hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, I got to go back to what I said. I'll leave that to you guys. I'm not the one who can answer that question.
Well, hypothetically, suppose a member of the NISOS group did testify at trial as to the time spent and the expenses incurred in investigating Mr. Tripp. Wouldn't it be necessary for you to then testify about that, would it?
Objection, calls for speculation, incomplete hypothetical.
Depends on who can report it accurately. We already know that based on my work, that the amounts on Schedule 5 are not quite accurate. So my testimony will be accurate. If they rely on Exhibit 5, they will be about $9,000 or $10,000 off what their numbers actually add up to.
Well, let's suppose somebody from the NISOS group, thankful for the work that you did, corrected the errors in their spreadsheets and testified accurately as to the time and money spent on the investigation. If that occurred, would you even need to testify as to that?
Objection, incomplete hypothetical, calls for a legal conclusion and speculation.
I don't know.
Do you know if those two kits were purchased or leased?
We can go back to the invoices and look. I recall there's a purchase there, but I don't remember what they say. So we can look at the invoices and find out.
Do you know if NISOS can use these kits for other investigations?
I do not.
Sir, the third category of your report is stock price reaction. Is that correct?
The stock price what, I'm sorry?
Stock price reaction.
Reaction, thank you.
Yes.
And this is, at least in terms of numerical size, this is the largest component of your damages analysis, correct?
Yes.
In the is it your opinion that Mr. Tripp caused $167 million of market cap damage to Tesla stock?
I cannot reach that conclusion. I believe my information is relevant for a finder of fact to combine this calculation with other information and draw its own conclusion, but I can't reach that conclusion alone.
Is it your opinion that the Business Insider articles published on June 4 and June 6 caused Tesla's stock price to decline?
I can't reach that conclusion, though I have attempted to rule out other things that would normally be considered as possible causes. And I don't have anything else to rule out at this point.
All right. So I think we've established there was one article published on June 4, and that was, at least according to your report, published 19 minutes before the end of regular trading. Is that right?
Correct.
And based on your report, Tesla's stock price went down 20 cents per share in that 19 minutes. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the June 4 closing price at the end of regular trading was $296.74. Is that right?
I don't have it memorized. I'll either accept it, or if you want me to look it up, I'll find it, because I assume you...
Check your report. I mean, I want to make sure the numbers are accurate, sir.
Okay, what was the number you said?
$296.74.
Yes, that's correct.
And I'm reading this from paragraph 21 of your report. Given the 170.5 million shares of Tesla stock outstanding at the time, this translates into a $34 million decline in market capitalization over those 19 minutes of trading. Did I read that correctly, sir?
Yes.
And again, are you opining that Tesla's stock price was damaged by Mr. Tripp?
and I'll give you the same answer I did before, which is I've attempted to rule out other causes, but I can't conclude that it was caused by Mr. Tripp. I can't conclude it was not either.
Can you tell me what the percentage change in the stock price was during those 19 minutes?
Oh, excuse me, 0.07%.
Okay. I got 0.067%, but you're rounding up a little bit. Have you done any analysis to determine whether or not a 0.07% change in the stock price is a statistically significant movement in the stock price?
Yes, it would inherently not be, but that's one of the interesting things about this methodology, not my methodology, the way looking at stock prices. Because of Tesla's price, to be a statistically significant move, you'd have to move billions of dollars. So let me give you a hypothetical. If there's something that we agree, just because we agree, that something affected the stock price, but less than billions of dollars worth, you will not find it to be statistically significant, even though we've already agreed that that was the cause of the difference. So the fact that it's not statistically significant does not tell you that it still isn't a cause, nor does it tell you it is a cause.
So if hypothetically Tesla's CEO in August of 2018 put out a tweet that he was thinking of taking the company private at $420 a share, and then that caused the market cap to decline by several $billions, that would be a statistically significant change in the stock price?
Incomplete hypothetical.
I haven't calculated what level of change is required in Tesla stock to be statistically significant. I just know it's a lot more than a few $1 million. I used $1 billion, but not because I computed $1 billion, so I can't answer the question as to whether that particular change was or was not.
Okay. But in this case, you'd agree with me that there was no statistically significant change in Tesla stock price in the final 19 minutes of regular trading on June 4, correct?
I would agree with that, and again, point out that a change of 34 million, let's say we hypothetically assume that Mr. Tripp or some other cause caused a $34 million change, that would never be observed as statistically significant, even though it's real. I mean, real in our hypothetical. So that's just one of the characteristics of that kind of methodology.
Can you tell me what the overall variance was of Tesla stock price on June 4 of 2018?
Not off the top of my head.
Can we go off the record?
Sure.
This marks the end of media number 1 in the continuing deposition of Jeffrey H. Kinrich. We are off the record at 11:53 a.m. This marks the beginning of media number 2 in the continuing deposition of Jeffrey Kinrich. We are back on the record at 11:54 a.m.
Going back to paragraph 21 of your report, sir, it states, while the S&P 500 decreased 0.02% over the same 19-minute period, the NASDAQ Composite Index and the NASDAQ OMX Global Automotive Index both increased.
I'm going to back up to OMX.
Global Automotive Index both increased by 0.02% and 0.04%, respectively. This indicates that the decline is not attributable to general market or industry trends. Did I accurately quote your report, sir?
Yes.
The 0.02% increase in the S&P 500 during that 19 minutes, is that a statistically significant change in that index?
I haven't looked, but my expectation would be it is not.
And then the 0.02% increase in the NASDAQ composite index. Is that a statistically significant increase of that index?
Same answer.
It is not a statistically significant
No,
increase?
I haven't looked, but it would be my expectation without actually doing any calculation or confirmation that it would not be. But I haven't computed, so I could be wrong.
And then with respect to the 0.04% increase in the NASDAQ OMX Global Automotive Index, I assume, same answer, you've not checked it, but you would assume it is a not statistically significant change in the price of that index?
The only thing I would correct is I wouldn't use the word assume. I would say that I wouldn't expect it to be.
Fair enough.
It's not
sir.
an assumption.
And you state, this indicates that the decline is not attributable to general market or industry trends. You stated earlier you attempted to identify other potential causes that might have resulted in the Tesla stock price going down by 20 cents during the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to there in that last sentence about general market or industry trends?
That's one of the things I'm referring to.
What other things did you look at and possibly eliminate as other causes?
I looked for other Tesla news, market news, other things that might occur during that period that could or could not move the market, and did not see any other Tesla information out in the marketplace.
What other things did you do to eliminate other possible causes?
That's it. The general industry, which is driven in part by those two indices, not driven by, that is, the analysis is based on those two indices, and then things that would move Tesla stock separately, which would be news or information about Tesla.
Is it your opinion that the movement in Tesla stock price should typically correlate to the movement in the S&P 500, NASDAQ, or NASDAQ OMX Global Automotive Index?
Not necessarily, though it was more likely to move, to be influenced by, that's wrong, it's not a question of influence. It's more likely to move in concert with the indices that are closer to Tesla, such as the automotive index, than it is to the general market as a whole. But even the general market as a whole, most stocks have a reasonable correlation to general market movements. If the market crashes, most stocks crash too. Market skyrockets, most stocks skyrocket too.
Have you done any analysis as to what that correlation should be between Tesla stock price and those three indices?
No need to do that in this case.
Why is there no need?
Because of the direction they moved. The two NASDAQ indices went up, and so any correlation would be expected to go in the same direction. Whether it's 99% or only 50% correlation, they would move upward, not downward.
Are you saying that every time either the NASDAQ or the NASDAQ OMX Global Index goes up, Tesla stock goes up?
Every time, no. It's the question of correlation. Correlation is not every time. Correlation is tendencies.
I'm sorry, did you say penitent?
Tendencies.
Tendencies, thank you.
All right. Have you done any kind of statistical or linear regression analysis to identify the correlation between the movement in those three indices and Tesla stock price?
I have not. No need to here.
Well, why is there no need to?
I already gave you this answer, same one I gave a moment ago, which is that because they went up, you have a direction. No matter what the correlation is, it's going to be positive, not negative. And so I didn't have to do anything.
Right, but doesn't that presume that if NASDAQ and the NASDAQ OMX index go up, that Tesla stock should go up too?
There's no should. There's a question of, stocks tend to move, even on related stocks. When the market goes up as a whole, most stocks go up. Here we have a much closer tie, and we have a direction that there's really nothing more to do an investigation on. If the market had plummeted, I would say, well, maybe that's the cause. Not maybe, I said that poorly. Maybe whatever caused the market to plummet also caused Tesla stock to plummet. But since I don't have that here, I have an increase, small though it may be, I didn't have to take it any further to know that I've dealt with that possible influence.
And sitting here today, you can't tell me that the movement in any of those three indices was statistically significant in the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4, can you?
No, in fact, I already told you it would be unlikely they would be, and that's consistent with what we'd expect to happen.
And once again, you've done no statistical analysis or linear regression analysis to analyze the general correlation between movement of Tesla stock price and the movement of those three indices, correct?
Correct. No need to in this case.
And you're saying there's no need to because at least two of the three indices went up, is that right?
Well, the two relevant ones, yes.
Are
The
you
two
saying-
most relevant ones.
You're saying the S&P 500 is not a relevant indice?
It's less relevant because it's broader and less related to the kind of business that Tesla's in.
And there's no other relevant indices in making that comparison?
Not that I've looked at. No.
Have you done any analysis to determine how closely Tesla's stock price tracked those three indices throughout the trading day of June 4?
I did not.
And again, you perform no type of statistical analysis or linear regression analysis to confirm that the movement of Tesla stock price should typically track those three indices?
Nor am I even concluding that. I mean, I didn't attempt to do that because that's not the relevant question.
Right. So you're not, sitting here today, your opinion is not that the Tesla stock price should typically track either the NASDAQ index or the NASDAQ OMX Global Automotive Index?
No, although it will, is my belief, though it's irrelevant to this case, that there will be some reasonably high correlation there. But that's not the purpose for doing this portion of the analysis, so it really has no relevance.
And I understand. I mean, for example, if the NASDAQ were to plummet by, say, 10%, then probably all the stocks on that particular indice would suffer. Is that fair to say?
And that's kind of what I'm getting at, that there was not an external movement in the market that would otherwise explain this, and that's what I'm drawing from this conclusion. So I think you see it, you understand it now.
But the movement by all three indices on June 4, you'd agree with me, was not statistically significant.
Well, I might agree with you. It's a question of what do you mean by statistically significant? In the sense that it is not a whole lot different during that period than it was before that period. In other words, it didn't move very much. I will agree it moved very little. And moving very little means it's not statistically significantly different than zero. You always have to ask the question, statistically significant compared to what? That's always an implied question. I've answered your questions today on the assumption you meant compared to a movement of zero.
Well, how much did the NASDAQ move throughout the trading day on June 4 as compared to the last 19 minutes of June 4?
Oh, I don't know.
How much did the NASDAQ OMX Global Automotive Index move throughout the trading day on June 4 as compared to the last 19 minutes?
I don't know. I may have known once because I saw the numbers, but I don't have it in mind.
And there's certainly nothing in your report making that comparison, is that correct?
Agreed. It would be a fairly silly comparison to make. Anyone who made it, I would say, that's irrelevant. Don't bother doing that. It doesn't mean anything.
Why would it be a silly comparison?
Why would it matter at all? The only thing that matters is what happened after the report came out. If the market skyrocketed in the morning because some great announcement happened, that would have no relevance to the question. If the market plummeted, that would have no relevance to the question.
The market plummeted. Go ahead.
That would have no relevance to the question.
Are you saying the overall movement in those three indices on June 4 wouldn't have any relevance to, say, the volatility of those indices compared to Tesla stock?
I don't think that was your question, and I'm not sure I understand what that has to do with what I was just explaining. So I guess the answer is I'm not saying that because I don't understand what you're asking.
Read the last question back to the witness.
No, I heard the words. I mean, you can ask it again. I don't mind, but it's not going to change my answer. The question doesn't. I don't understand what that has to do with my prior answer, which I think you were.
Has to do. Slow down.
I don't understand what that has to do with my prior answer, which is what I think you were responding to. If I'm wrong, you may try it again.
Did the three indices that you identified, did they finish up or down that day?
I don't know. Wouldn't matter.
Why would it not matter?
For all the reasons I described just a few answers ago, that whatever happens before the 19 minutes is sunk, it's moot. If the market skyrocketed or plummeted before then, you don't care. It doesn't affect what is happening at that point.
All right. Did you do any analysis to determine whether or not the Tesla stock price correlated with either the NASDAQ or the NASDAQ Automotive Index for, say, June 5 to June 11?
I did not, nor would it have any relevance.
Well-
But the answer is no, I did not.
So, well, you told me before that looking at what happened before publication was irrelevant. Is that right?
Yes.
Are you telling me what happened after publication is also irrelevant?
Not after immediately. That's why we do the 19 minutes to the end of the business day. But what happens a day later or 2 days later or 5 days later is irrelevant.
All right. What are you basing that off of?
Efficient markets.
Okay, explain that, please. I'm familiar with the theory, but explain that. If I'm a juror and I'm a retired school teacher, explain that theory to me and how it factors into your opinion.
A stock that's widely covered, I'll leave it at covered, like Tesla, because Tesla has a lot of people who are, a lot of analysts who follow it and a lot of investors in it, incorporates changes in information quite quickly. So the kind of information that comes out, whether it's a Elon Musk tweet or a Elon Musk tweet or a public earnings announcement or a leak from Tripp, because Tesla is trading efficiently, would be expected to be incorporated quite quickly. And so the time period immediately after a disclosure is where you would expect to find the information. By the time you get to the next business day, they would already be incorporated, and equally relevant, perhaps even more relevant, other news, other information then interferes is the wrong word, but also occurs. And so you can no longer distinguish the influences of the various causes. That's why the short period matters, but over a long period of time, I mean, the next day, as I recall, was the stockholders meeting, and certainly the influence of the stockholders meeting would have a lot to, would be fairly large, and if you look at it, you see that it probably was. So it's a distinguishing, sorry, I spoke poorly. You can distinguish the causation elements
Did you
and
say
causation elements,
thank you.
and can no longer identify any influence for the earlier news, but that would already have been incorporated anyway.
You don't have a causation opinion in this case, correct?
I don't have an ultimate conclusion. I have, as I said before, I've attempted to rule out some things that would be potential causes, and I think I've succeeded in that. But I have not drawn the conclusion that the entire 20 cents was caused by Mr. Tripp, the disclosure from Mr. Tripp, though it is not inconsistent with what I've been able to find.
Going back to the issue of efficient markets, what in your opinion is the appropriate amount of, what's the appropriate window to track the change in Tesla's stock price following the publication of the article?
It's not a predetermined amount. It depends on issues about news coverage and disclosures and whether there are other intervening but unrelated events. In this case, tracking through the end of the stock market close made sense. The opening the next morning was already influenced by, at least potentially, by other news events that had occurred about Tesla in the intervening time. There were other news events. And so you can no longer track it after that.
What other news events occurred between the publication of the first Business Insider article and June 4th, and when Tesla opened up for regular trading on June 5th of 2018?
I don't remember, just that they were there.
Suppose the Business Insider article had come out 1 minute after trading had opened on June 4th. Would you examine the stock price for the entire trading day as part of your analysis?
Incomplete hypothetical.
You might look at it. It depends on what else happens. If there was other news later in the day, that might be something you cut off and you say, I can no longer isolate the impact of this event. So you'd have to look at the underlying facts and circumstances to decide what the appropriate time period is. Quite often on these kind of studies, an entire day is relevant, but that assumes that the only relevant news that came out is the item you're studying.
According to Exhibit 5 of your report, the price of Tesla stock just before the publication of the first Business Insider article on June 4 was $296.94, correct?
Yes.
Is it your opinion that had that Business Insider article not been published, that Tesla stock would have remained static at $296.94 for the remaining 19 minutes of the regular trading day?
No, I can't draw that conclusion.
Sitting here today, well, do you have any opinion as to what Tesla stock price would have been at the end of regular trading on June 4 of 2018 had the Business Insider article not been published?
I don't think I can answer that question.
Well, I'm asking you, do you have an opinion?
Oh, I don't think I have an opinion. I have information that's consistent with the 20-cent drop being related to the Business Insider article, but it doesn't, I can't demonstrate that it was caused by it.
Have you done any comparison? No, strike that. Have you done any comparison between Tesla stock? Strike that. Have you done any comparison of the volatility of Tesla stock versus the volatility of those three indices we were talking about earlier?
No.
So the second Business Insider article was published on June 6, is that right?
Yes.
And in this case, it was published, according to your report, 40 minutes before the close of trading. Is that right?
Correct.
And according to your report, in that 40 minutes of trading, the stock price went from $320.28 to a closing price at the end of regular trading of $319.50. Is that right?
Yes.
Let me go back to June 4th. Did when trading opened on June 5th, regular trading opened on June 5th, did the stock price open higher or lower than it had closed at?
I don't have the information here in front of me, but my recollection is it opened higher. I'm not absolutely certain of that.
So to the extent any losses were caused, or strike that, to the extent any reduction in the stock value was caused by Mr. Tripp and the publication of the Business Insider article on June 4, those losses have been wiped out by the beginning of regular trading on June 5?
No.
Why not?
Because let's assume hypothetically that the 20-cent loss was caused, just for purposes.
Hypothetically.
Yeah. Hypothetically, then the next day the price would still be 20 cents higher than it was. So essentially, you have a 20-cent depression in the price,
Well,
even if it went up.
Do you have an opinion as to what the Tesla stock price should have opened at on June 5 if the Business Insider article had not been published on June 4?
No, for the same reasons as before. But if you want to work with the hypothetical that the 20 cents was caused by the article, and I understand that that's not where we are, then the opinion would be it should have opened 20 cents higher than it did.
Right. Do you have any analysis whatsoever to support that conclusion?
Which one? In the hypothetical, or the conclusion that the 20 cents was caused by the article itself?
In the hypothetical.
Yes, that's how. That's the natural result of the assumption that the Business Insider article caused a 20-cent depression in the stock.
But that's an assumption you're making, correct?
Well, I'm not making the assumption. Maybe we're speaking past each other. It was the hypothetical that we were talking about.
Right.
Within the
Talking about a
hypothetical.
But you're talking at the same time.
Yeah. Within the hypothetical, I have a basis for it because it is the basis for the hypothetical. So I'm confused as to where the confusion is.
But just so I'm clear, you have no opinion as to what the Tesla stock price would be at the beginning of regular trading on June 5 had the Business Insider article not been published on June 4, correct?
Correct, unless one makes an assumption about about causation that I've already told you I'm not making on June 4.
All right. Going back to the June 6 article, in paragraph 22 of your report, you state that given the 170.5 million shares of Tesla stock outstanding, this translates into a $134 million decline in market capitalization over those 40 minutes of trading. Did I accurately state that portion of your report?
Yes.
So again, Tesla closed at $319.50 on June 6 at the end of regular trading, correct?
Correct.
What was the percentage change during that last 40 minutes of trading?
What paragraph were you reading from, just so I can find it more quickly?
Paragraph 22. And I'm also looking at Exhibit 6 to your report as well.
Right, I was on Exhibit 6, but it didn't have the percentage, so it's in paragraph 22. It was 0.25%, 0.25%.
Is that a statistically significant movement in the Tesla stock price?
Compared to 0, I didn't look, but I would expect the answer is no. For the same reasons as I stated earlier.
Well, I want to understand your answer. You're saying compared to 0, that is not a statistically significant movement in the Tesla stock price?
Yes. Or it's probably not.
Probably not.
I haven't done the calculations, but that would be my expectation.
But hypothetically, if, say, the NASDAQ had gone down by 10% during that same time period due to a market crash, but the Tesla stock only moved 0.25%, would you consider that to be a statistically significant movement in the Tesla stock price?
Probably. I mean, again, I'd have to do the analysis, but that's the kind of thing that you would typically conclude in those circumstances.
Okay. Well, and so let's go back to then June 4th. We talked earlier about, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe the percentage difference in the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4 was 0.07%, correct?
Correct.
And I know we've covered this, I just want to have a good record. Do you have any opinion as to whether or not that 0.07% was a statistically significant movement in the Tesla stock price?
Expectation of 0, given that the other indices essentially didn't move or moved modestly up.
Well, and that's my question is, does your answer as to whether or not it was a statistically significant movement in the Tesla stock price, does your answer change if instead of comparing it to 0, you're comparing it to the movement of those other 3 indices?
It doesn't, the answer doesn't change because in this case, the other 2 indices barely moved. Conceptually, it's different, meaning that you could have a different answer. If the other indices move significantly, then Tesla's not moving might be a statistically significant conclusion.
Understood. But at least on June 4, those other 3 indices did not move significantly, correct? In the last 19 minutes of trading.
Correct, and the 2 most relevant ones moved up, which means that those are not, whatever caused that underlying movement is not being reflected in the Tesla stock.
Okay. But is the upward movement of those 2 indices on June 4, NASDAQ and the NASDAQ Automotive Index, was that upward movement a statistically significant movement?
Well, and again, the question is compared to what? Compared to 0? Compared to not moving at all? Probably not, though again, that's only a expectation based on experience. I haven't done the calculation.
Is the movement of those 2 indices statistically significant when compared to the movement of Tesla stock price during the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4th?
I think, if you don't mind me, let me rephrase your question to what I think you're trying to get at.
Go ahead.
I think you're saying is controlling for the movement of the market indices, did the Tesla stock move in a statistically significant fashion?
Yes.
And there, I've already answered, as I said, that the answer is probably not. And because in order for Tesla stock to move in a statistically significant fashion, the movement has to be much larger. So a small movement that was actually caused by an underlying event would never be statistically significant, even though it's real. And that's where we are in this kind of a relatively small influence.
Do you agree with me that if there was a statistically significant movement in the stock price, that would, by definition, exclude other potential causes?
No,
Why don't you agree with that statement?
because you can't tell just from the mathematics whether you have isolated one cause or if there are multiple causes. For example, take a different case, a case in which there is some public earnings announcement. On a day of a public earnings announcement, there typically are 10 things listed in the announcement. What you're measuring is the impact of all of them put together. You're not measuring the impact of any one of them. So if one of them is the item of concern, you may or may not be able to say it's related to that and not something else.
Going back to June 6, and then paragraph 22 of your report, you state the S&P 500, NASDAQ Composite, and NASDAQ OMX Global Automobile indices all increased over the same 40-minute period by 0.16%, 0.15%, and 0.05% respectively. This again indicates that the decline is not attributable to general market or industry trends. Did I quote that accurately?
Mostly.
Well, did I get the substance of it right?
You did.
Thank you. And with the June 4 analysis, you looked at these three indices and you also looked for any other possible news stories involving Tesla during that last 40 minutes of trading?
Correct.
Did you find any news stories?
No.
And that was the only thing
I'm sorry, there were news stories. There's nothing that was new news. In other words, somebody may say something that was already well known. That's not new news.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Is the information in the Business Insider article on either day, was that new news?
I believe so. I mean, it was new information. Whether it's, if you're asking if it's fake news or not, that's a different issue.
No, I'm asking whether or not there's the information in those two Business Insider articles had any information similar to that been published before?
Not to my knowledge, but I don't know that I know with certainty.
Okay. But going back to June 6 now, again, you looked at the movement of those three indices and then also whether or not there was any new news about Tesla during that 40-minute period, correct?
Correct.
With respect to the movements of those three indices, the 0.16%, 0.15%, and 0.05%, compared to zero, are those statistically significant movements?
I don't know. I didn't look.
Do you have a suspicion or an inkling?
I suspect they're not. I suspect there was nothing dramatically affecting the market during that period, and so that's why I get to the conclusions I do.
Okay. In the, I think we established that during the last 40 minutes of June 6th, the Tesla stock price went down by 0.25%, correct?
Correct.
And again, compared to zero, is that a statistically significant movement in the stock price compared to zero?
Probably not, because as I said, you have to have a much larger movement to be able to be called statistically significant. And so any modest movement, even if caused by something, will not show up as statistically significant.
But you've never done any analysis to that issue, have you?
What do you mean by that?
Other than me asking you these questions here today, you didn't do any analysis about the statistical significance of stock price movement of Tesla stock in formulating your opinion, did you?
Well, I guess it's hard to answer that. At one point in the process, I did a rough estimate of what magnitude of movement would be required to reach statistical significance. That's how I can say the things I did. So I did that.
Okay, fair enough. Any other analysis?
No. I mean, not on that narrow issue. I did the analyses I've already talked about noting that the indices moved up and Tesla moved down, so the indices or the things that cause the indices to move are not possible explanations for the Tesla movement. But that's just a repeat of what I've already told you.
What caused those three indices to move up during the last 40 minutes of trading?
Oh, I don't know. Nor is it particularly relevant. What I do with that is the fact they did move, not what any potential underlying cause is.
Have you done any analysis to determine whether or not the Tesla stock price during regular trading on June 6 correlated with the prices of those three indices?
I did not. Nor do I think you need to.
No, I understand you don't think it's necessary. I just want to make my record. Do you know whether or not those three indices finished up or down that day?
I do not.
And you'd agree with me that the Tesla stock price would not be expected to remain static at $300.28 during the last 40 minutes of trading?
Well, let me make sure I get your question carefully phrased. The expectation is that it would be, that's where it would be. I don't expect that there'd be no changes during that time, but if you're talking about the mathematical concept of expectation, your expectation is that it would be unchanged. That doesn't mean that you think that in hindsight there will be no changes at that are up or down. It's just kind of like the expectation of rolling a die is 3.5. You can get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Your expected value is 3.5. Doesn't mean you're ever going to roll a 3.5.
Well, do you have any opinion as to what the Tesla stock price would have been at the close of regular trading on June 6th had that second Business Insider article not been published?
Given what you know at the 1 minute before that, your expected value is to be unchanged, subject to the movements in the market. That doesn't mean I think that there's a high probability of that, but the likelihood is just as good to be up or down. So your middle value, your expectation is unchanged.
But my question is, do you have any opinion as to what the Tesla stock price would have been at the close of regular trading on June 6th had that second Business Insider article not been published?
Right, and I'm telling you, the expectation sitting there at the minute before the publication, if you're asked, what is your statistical expectation of what the price will be in 40 minutes, but knowing now with hindsight the changes in the market indices that they were up a very tiny amount, your expectation would be it would be flat to up slightly.
All right. What analysis have you done? Any kind of statistical or linear regression analysis to support that conclusion?
Over the years, I've done thousands of. Well, that's probably a lie.
In this case, have you done one?
No, I don't have to because I have the direction. Knowing that the expectation is for a change of zero is just basic finance. Knowing that it would be expected to go up because you now know with hindsight that the indices went up is also just basic finance. So I don't have to do anything to know that answer.
So is it your opinion that had the second Business Insider article not been published, that the Tesla stock would have finished the regular trading day at $320.28 per share?
Well, I'm trying to be careful in answering it because we have two different concepts that I think are easily confused in English, in just our conversation. If you're saying, given what you know, would you expect the stock to either be flat or, in this case, slightly up because the indices were slightly up? The answer is yes. If you're saying, what probability would you assign to getting exactly that number, not a penny higher or a penny lower? The answer is you'd expect to be fairly low probability because it'll fluctuate.
So, but your testimony, as I understand it, is that the expectation would be that at the close of regular trading on June 6th, the Tesla stock would finish near or higher than $328.28 because those other three indices made a slight upward movement. Is that right?
If that's all you knew, that would be your expectation.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, but doesn't that presuppose that the Tesla stock would typically track those three indices on any given trading day?
I'm sorry, does that predispose of the Tesla stock? Go ahead from there.
Would typically track those three indices on any given trading day?
Well, track has a correlation with, I think is the way I would word it. You may mean that when you say track, but it doesn't mean that it corresponds change by change.
Let me rephrase the question. Doesn't your conclusion presuppose that there is a correlation between the Tesla stock price and those three indices on any given trading day?
Not on any given trading day, over time.
And just so I'm clear, you have done no statistical analysis or linear regression analysis to identify the correlation between Tesla stock and any of those three indices?
That's correct. I wasn't trying to draw these conclusions. I'm only doing them because you've asked me, and so I'm doing my best.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not throughout 2018 Tesla stock was more or less volatile than those three indices we were discussing earlier?
Without looking, I would expect it to be more volatile. Almost any stock is more volatile than an index because indices by definition are an aggregation of multiple stocks.
What kind of factors can affect the price of a stock?
Almost anything that relates to, there could be factors related to the general market, factors related to industry, factors related to the company's individual performance, factors related to change in investor sentiment, and probably lots of other things.
Well, so what other things are there?
I mean, I'm not even going to try to speculate. I probably covered most of them in that list because there are lots of things under each of those.
How did you exclude, let's say, you claim to have excluded general market conditions by looking at the other indices, is that right?
Yes.
But how did you exclude those other three factors as influencing the change of Tesla stock price on June 4 and June 6?
Mostly, I can't answer because I can't remember what factors I said, so can you remind me what I said?
Well, it looked like industry, the performance of the company, and investor sentiment.
Okay. Well, industry I've also covered through the market indices. Investor sentiment, I think, is also reflected through the market indices. So essentially, the market indices are a way to control for that.
Market indices.
Are a way to control for those items. The one that isn't there that isn't controlled rather by those indices is news about Tesla, and that we did that by looking to see if there was any news about Tesla during this period, and there was not. So I think we've done what can be done to control for those factors.
All right, but those four factors aren't the only factors that can influence the price of a stock, correct?
I'm not sure that's true. I think they're broad enough that maybe everything I can think of would fall into those categories, though I'm happy to entertain some suggestions as to what I've missed.
Well, do you think you missed anything?
No.
All right. And so, if I understand your testimony correctly, you can identify or you can exclude those other factors as influencing the price of Tesla stock just by looking at news reports and those three indices that you identified?
From an expectations basis, yes. I think that probably covers, at least conceptually, the various things that you would expect to find in the marketplace.
The losses, right, let me strike that. Let's assume hypothetically that Mr. Tripp caused the slight decline in the stock price on June 4 and June 6. Weren't those losses actually borne by the investors that held the Tesla stock?
While they may have borne a decline in their stock price, that's what you say is not correct, or is at least doesn't exclude the fact that the company suffered the loss. A valuation, a stock price, is the market's perception of the present value of future economic benefits. So when a stock price declines, it means there's a perception that the future economic benefits that will be earned by that stock are less than previously anticipated. And that is a loss to the company, not to the stockholders. Obviously, there's a transfer. The stockholders' value is influenced by what the company makes, but the loss in present value of earnings is a loss to the company itself.
Did Tesla have to write a $167 million check to cover that loss?
No, it's a question of expectations about the future and what the present value of that calculation is.
Well, I'm talking about actual dollars here.
So am I.
Was there any actual dollar loss to Tesla as the result in the movement of the stock price on June 4 and June 6?
They didn't write a check on that day. It is a calculation of their expected losses in present value terms, the impact of the news disclosures.
Did Tesla report that loss in any public disclosures that they're required to make as a publicly traded company?
No.
Objection calls for legal conclusion and speculation.
No. A, I don't know what they did, but B, there's nothing there to report.
Why is there nothing there to report?
Because that's not the kind of thing that any public filing requires you to report.
You're not required to report a $167 million loss if you're a publicly traded company?
It's not an accounting loss. It's something that's a present value of a future expectation. So the answer is no, of course not.
Well, explain the difference between that and an accounting loss for me.
It is not something that has occurred that you're going to book as of that day. The accounting rules talk about what happens in the time period. First of all, you wouldn't report it at that point, but even at the end of the quarter, you wouldn't have anything to report. But if your business expectations or profitability expectations are now lower than they otherwise were, you will report it by reporting those lower earnings in the future without any comparison to what they might have been.
But isn't it a fact that by June 11th, the stock price was well above what the closing price was on either June 4 or June 6th?
I believe so, yes.
And it's still your opinion that there was a $167 million loss suffered by Tesla?
Well, subject to what I've talked to you about causation, yes.
Were the shareholders damaged at all by the movement in the stock price?
Indirectly, yes.
Right, and
Secondarily.
The lawsuit in this case is brought by Tesla. It's not brought by Tesla on behalf of its shareholders. Fair to say?
I do not know that.
Let's assume that it does. To your knowledge, did Tesla sell any of its own stock at a loss on June 4th?
Not to my knowledge.
Did Tesla sell any of its own stock on June 6th at a loss?
I have no knowledge one way or the other.
Is it true that Elon Musk is the largest?
Is it true? Start over, please.
That Elon Musk is the largest shareholder of Tesla stock?
Objection to the extent it calls for speculation.
I have heard that, but I have no reason to be able to testify as to its truth. I haven't looked and don't know.
Well, you've heard that. Why can't you testify as to its truth?
Because I haven't gone to look it up, and I may not even remember what I've heard properly. It's easily knowable. I suspect you know it, but I'm not going to be the one to testify to it without confirming it with some source.
Okay, so you've heard that Elon Musk is the largest Tesla shareholder, but you don't know whether or not it's true. Is that correct?
I don't know with certainty that it's true.
Okay. Just like you've been told certain things by counsel in this case, but you don't know whether or not they're true, do you?
Objection vague and argumentative.
Depending on which items, some might be correct, and some that might not be.
Do you have any information that Mr. Musk sold any of his Tesla stock at a loss on June 4 or June 6th?
Calls for speculation.
I don't know.
Bill, do you want to take a lunch break at
Yeah,
any
let's
point?
do that. That's a good idea.
We are off the record at 12:40 p.m. We are back on the record at 1:22 p.m.
Sir, we were discussing part 3 or the third category of damages in your report, namely the $167 million in market cap reduction to Tesla stock. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I'm trying to understand how it is that you're claiming that there has been $167 million in damages to Tesla. Is that correct?
No.
You're not claiming that. What are you claiming?
That there is evidence to support that, but I can't reach that ultimate conclusion. Other evidence will have to be taken into account as well.
Okay. But assuming if a fact finder concludes that the Business Insider articles caused the Tesla stock price to diminish on June 4 and June 6, it is your opinion that represents $167 million in damages to Tesla. Is that correct?
If that is attributable to the liability acts, then yes.
Okay. But it's not an accounting loss that, for example, Tesla would have reported on a financial statement, correct?
Correct.
Is it an economic loss to Tesla, that $167 million?
Over the present value of expected future benefits, yes.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, the market, again, under the hypothetical, so I won't keep repeating that, the market perceives that Tesla's future economic benefits will be $167 million, or whatever the number is, less than it perceived previously. And so that is the loss that Tesla is expected to suffer compared to what it would without that information.
Right. But if the stock price goes up subsequent to June 6, isn't that a loss? Isn't that loss eliminated?
No, then it's going up for the other causes, for whatever brought something to be increased. In other words, they got good news on something else, or some other positive development, or the market went up in general. Those are all separate causes. You still have a decline, just like any stock causation case, caused by the hypothetical assumed liability act.
So, I mean, the price of a stock, at least in the hypothetical sense, is the present value of future dividends or future earnings that stock is expected to generate. Is that correct?
Future economic benefits.
Okay. And are you saying that by the stock price going down on June 4 and June 6, those future economic benefits were thereby diminished?
That is not thereby, it's the other way around.
Okay.
Because they were diminished, the stock price went down.
Okay. So let me go back to your report here, if I could. June 4, just before the first Business Insider article comes out, the stock price is $296.94, correct?
Okay.
Is that correct?
I mean, you're reading it. I don't have it in front of me, but there's no reason to challenge it. I don't think that's a premise.
I'm looking at Exhibit 5 to your report, just so we're on the same page.
Okay.
Again, that means that the future economic, or the present value of the expected economic benefit of the stock is $296.94 on June 4 before the article is published, correct?
Correct.
By the opening of trading the next business day, the stock price is already higher than $296.94, correct?
Correct.
So in less than 24 hours, the present value of the expected economic benefit of the stock has already increased, correct?
Correct.
Then how could you characterize that as damages?
Maybe we're talking past each other because this isn't actually hard. You went down by, again, under the hypothetical, you went down by 20 cents. That 20 cents is an actual loss. Now you go back up for some other reason. Tomorrow had news, the next day had news, the market perceives the impact of that news is impacting the stock price. But you're still down by 20 cents over where you would have been.
Well, who's down by 20 cents?
The expected future benefit, two people, one direct, one indirect. The direct is the company. The company's expected future economic benefit has decreased by 20 cents a share by $33 million. The stockholders indirectly suffer that because that flows through to the stockholders through the stock price. But the change in stock price is a measure of the change of economic value of the company itself.
Right, but the stockholders themselves, aren't they the ones that are directly impacted? I mean, they own the stock, right?
They're indirect.
Objection compound.
They do own the stock, by definition, yes.
Okay, then how is it that they're not directly affected by that?
Well, they're directly affected by the change in stock price. The point is the change in stock price is a realization of the change of the economic benefit of Tesla. That's the indirect portion. The stock price is an indirect measure of what is being done in the company itself, that is the operations. Once the stock price changes, yes, then the shareholders enjoy the benefit or suffer the detriment, but that's secondary.
Now, you don't know specifically what Tesla opened at June 5 on regular trading, do you, sir?
I do not.
All right. If I told you that it opened on June 5 at $297.70, would that sound about right?
Somewhere in that range. That I'm not going to argue with you.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand what you're telling me here. If the Tesla stock price went down by 20 cents per share in the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4, such that it closed at $296.74, but nevertheless opened the following morning at $297.70, Tesla was still damaged to the tune of $33.56 million?
Yes.
And that is an actual economic loss suffered by Tesla.
Yes.
Why is that an economic loss suffered by Tesla?
Because of the present value of the expected future changes based on the change of information in our hypothetical that was caused by the Business Insider article.
But it's not an accounting loss.
No, because all the accounting issues, the profits and losses will occur in the future. By definition, a value today is a value of future benefits.
But I know I've asked this before. I just want to make sure I'm clear. You have no opinion as to what the stock price would have been at the opening of regular trading on June 5 had the Business Insider article not been published the day before. Is that correct?
No.
Asked and answered Ms. State's prior testimony.
We have two elements here, and I am repeating myself, but it has been answered. I have already told you that I can't conclude that the Business Insider article was the cause, though I have tried to exclude other causes. So by deductive logic, the finder of fact may ultimately conclude it was the cause. That's part one. If I assume, for the purposes of this question, that it was the cause, then I can tell you what I expected to have opened the next day. I expected to have opened 20 cents higher than it did.
And have you done any? So it is your testimony then, if it is a metaphysical certainty that the Business Insider article caused the reduction in Tesla share value in the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4, then it would have opened on June 5 at $297.90?
If it was 70 cents, the answer is yes.
Have you done any analysis to support that conclusion, other than just simply adding 20 cents to what the actual number is?
But that's all you do. There is no other analysis to do, because you've already told me the hypothetical that the 20 cents was impacted by the article.
Have you done any analysis other than adding 20 cents onto the value of what the stock actually opened up at on
No,
June 5?
there was no other.
Sorry, you're going at the same
Sorry.
time. Other than the value, please pick up so we make sure your whole question is on the record.
Have you done any analysis other than adding 20 cents to the opening price on June 5 to come up with that conclusion?
No,
Objection. Incomplete hypothetical. You may answer.
no, there is no other analysis to be done. That is the analysis and how you would get to that conclusion.
Do you have any legal authority that you can cite me to for the proposition that Tesla may claim as damages this type of market cap effect?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion by definition.
I usually can't cite legal authority I do economics, not law, so the answer is no. I don't have anything because I don't know those things.
Have you ever provided a damages analysis similar to this case in other cases?
Objection vague as to similar.
Yes?
All right. Tell me about those other ones.
I don't have them clearly in mind. I don't tend to remember my cases after I get done. There are too many. But it is not uncommon to measure a future economic impact on a company by a change in stock price. And more than that, I don't think I can tell you. I can't give you a specific case.
We were talking earlier about, well, do you know what the highest point of Tesla's stock price was in 2018?
I do not.
All right. If I told you it was $379.57 on August 7th, would that sound about right?
It doesn't sound about right because I don't know.
Okay. Let's assume that that's in fact the case, that the high point in 2018 was $397.57 on August 7th. Are you
97 or 79?
379.57?
I think you said 97, sorry.
Pardon me, thank you. Are you aware that Mr. Musk made a tweet on the August 7th, considering taking Tesla private at 420, funding secured?
Let me divide that question into two parts. I'm aware he had a tweet that roughly said that. I am not aware of the date in which it occurred.
Okay. Are you aware that following that tweet, the Tesla stock price basically had a month-long slide such that it closed at $263.24 on September 7th, 2018?
Once again, I have to break that question into parts. I'm not aware of the actual dates of those events, not as I sit here, but I am aware that after that turned out not to be the case, that is, the funding was not secured, and he did not take the company private, that the stock price declined.
So if I look at the difference between the stock price on August 7th and September 7th, it's a difference of $116.33. Would you consider that to be a statistically significant movement in the Tesla stock price?
Gut feel, I think you'd probably say probably, but I can't conclude that because I haven't done any analysis. I don't know what else happened in the market or what else happened in the stock itself. So, I can't attribute cause without study, but you may be right.
Okay. So if I were to take your methodology and take 170.5 million shares and multiply it by a diminution in stock value over that month of $116.33, I get a number of $19.8 billion. Is that correct?
I'll accept your arithmetic. I didn't redo it.
So using your own methodology, we could postulate that Elon Musk caused $19.8 billion in damages to Tesla based on that 420 tweet?
Objection, an incomplete hypothetical assumes facts not in evidence and calls for speculation.
And no,
Why not?
because there are multiple events that occurred in that time period. You don't simply get to say, just because it was after, it was caused by.
What other events?
I don't know, other than Tesla has news almost every day. And
But-
so having a period of 30 days with no news, I don't believe happened.
But so you said something interesting. You said, repeat his last answer, please.
Answer, I don't know, other than Tesla has news almost every day, and so having a period of 30 days with no news, I don't believe happened.
Before that.
Oh. One moment, please. Because there's multiple events that occurred in that time period. You don't simply get to say just because it was after it was caused by.
So you said just because it was caused after it was caused by. We can't make that assumption. Is that right?
Not with multiple events occurring. That's why what I did for this case is I looked to see if there were other intervening events during the 19 minutes of the 40 minutes, and there were not.
All you looked at were news articles and 3 indices, correct?
Well-
Objection, misstates prior testimony.
Those were the outside sources of information I looked at, yes.
All right. But you didn't do any analysis as to whether or not there was an abnormal trading volume in the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4, did you?
What's probably not true, I didn't do anything specific for that, but I was observing trading volumes, and if there had been something odd, I would have noticed.
All right,
So
so-
I think I probably did without making it a point of investigation.
Is it your testimony then that you didn't see anything abnormal about trading volume of Tesla stock in the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4?
I don't remember seeing anything.
Do you remember seeing anything abnormal about the trading volume of Tesla stock during
Other
the
trading volume, slow down, please.
Tesla stock during the last 40 minutes of June 6?
I do not.
Going back to the Elon Musk tweet example, 2 days after the tweet, on August 9th, the stock price had gone down $27.12 to $352.45. Are you aware of that?
Again, I'm not aware of any particular price as I sit here. I know, I was there at the time. I don't mean I was there at Tesla, but I mean I went through those days and I remember seeing things in the news, but I do not remember any particular stock price as I sit here today.
Would you consider a $27.12 diminution in Tesla stock price over 2 days to be statistically significant
Compared to what?
compared to zero?
My suspicion, without doing an analysis, is it probably is statistically different than zero, but I don't know that with certainty without doing the analysis.
You said statistically different. Did you mean to say statistically significant?
No, what I said.
Well, anything's statistically different than zero. Only zero is zero, correct?
Wrong.
Oh, explain to me how that's wrong.
0.00001 under some circumstances not statistically different than zero.
Okay. Any other reason I'm wrong about that?
No, I mean, other than that example is why I said what I did.
But again, using your methodology, if there's a $27.12 reduction in Tesla stock value in the 2 days after Mr. Musk's 420 tweet, at least using your methodology, that's a $4.6 billion in damages. Is that right?
Objection, incomplete hypothetical, calls for speculation.
Yeah, I would not say using my methodology because my methodology was a lot more than just multiplying this change in stock price by the number of shares. However, if you multiply the change in stock price by the number of shares, I will accept without analysis that your multiplication is correct.
Sir, the court reporter's handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 14. It's the expert.
I'm sorry, did you write the number on it? I didn't see. You usually wrote number on it.
Sir, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 14. Do you recognize that as the expert report of Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
You indicated here earlier today that you had some opinions regarding Mr. Schultz's report. What are those opinions?
I think we probably covered many of them through my answers implicitly, even if not explicitly, but the only other way I can do it is just go through it section by section.
Please do.
Okay. I'm going to skip his qualifications and documents reviewed, materials reviewed. I just not really responsive to your question. So I'll start on the middle of page 3 where he says flaws. We've already discussed my comments about how the present value of future benefits is, in fact, a decline in value and the economic value of Tesla, not just the shareholders. So a lot of the first paragraph going on to the top of page 4 relates to that. So I think I've already covered that. The heading selective narrow time frame. I absolutely do select that time period. Any other time period would be an error.
Any other time period?
Any time period that doesn't, that tries to extend before the event, that goes to the whole day, for example, would be a clear error in the methodology.
But you said any other time period. So, for example, what if the time period was from 19 minutes before the close of trading on June 4 to 24 hours after that?
Yes, that would also be an error.
Why?
Because of the intervening events, the other news that has come out about Tesla during that time period.
What about 12 hours?
Well, anything that passes the end of the close, the market close, would be, let me back up. After the market close, the data in the overnight trading is usually pretty lousy and is not usually a good indicator of meaningful prices. The volume's too low, the liquidity's bad. So that's just a general principle. Unless you need to do something during the after hours time, usually you ignore it. So what we're really talking about is the next day. And the next day, we already have news out. So it's confounded and you can't learn much at that point.
So you're saying the only appropriate time period has to be between when the article was published and when the market closed at 4 p.m.
Given these facts, there are other cases where that isn't true. There are other cases when the only meaningful event is the event at issue, and the whole day may be relevant. In other words, maybe it came out before the market opened. There's no other meaningful information during the day, and so the entire day's stock price change is a meaningful measure. So it's case by case, but given these facts and given that the information didn't come out till late in the day, the answer is yes. I can't see another period. I certainly can't see a period that includes the next day when you had a stockholders meeting and you had significant news about that coming out the next day.
Okay. Well, but going back, I think this started out by me asking you if a 12-hour period would be appropriate, and what's your answer on that? Is it no because it's after the close of trading on the June 4th?
Yeah, you don't have any meaningful data between close of trading and the open the next morning. So there's nothing there to rely on. If I had good trading data and the market was active and then I might be able to do something with that time, but that doesn't exist.
Well, would it be appropriate to use a period of, say, the last 19 minutes of regular trading on June 4th and the first hour of after-hours trading?
No, because most after-hours stuff is really bad. I mean, just data-wise, it's really bad. You get very little market participations. The volume typically declines by 100-fold. Obviously, I don't know the particulars here, but it's not uncommon to see a 100-fold decline in market volume. And so you no longer get the efficient market and liquidity expectations that you have during the times the market is open.
All right. Going back to the Schultz report, so you take issue with his critique of the time period you selected. What else do you disagree with?
He makes some, what I consider minor and probably irrelevant commentary about averaging in the 1 minute. And then it says something about if you'd taken the lowest price in that minute. Well, why would you that's a biased measure. The average is an unbiased measure. So I don't understand why he would argue you take the lowest price. I'm trying to be unbiased, not try to pick the most extreme case, either high or low. The top of page 5, the first full paragraph, I don't believe I make that assumption.
Kinrich assumes?
Yes.
Without any evidence?
Yes. In fact, I've already told you that I don't know, I can't conclude with certainty that this did happen. I can only rule out things that I've attempted to rule out, and I have ruled them out. So I don't believe I believe he's just factually wrong about what I assume.
Well, you did state in your report that you were tasked with examining, let me pull out the exact language. I've been asked to discuss certain aspects of the harm to Tesla caused by plaintiff's disclosure of confidential information to the press. That's paragraph 11 to your report.
Yes. I don't think that changes anything, what I just said.
All right.
I
But
was
you're not
asked to discuss that.
So you take issue with Mr. Schultz assuming causation, which you have not, in fact, reached. Is that what you're saying?
That is one part of what I'm saying. There's another part, which I haven't mentioned in this last 30 seconds or minute, so let me add one more thing, which is his statement that shareholders were influenced by these articles. And he says that assumption, or this assumption, is unsupported. I believe that is not true. It is supported by the efficient markets hypothesis and the volume of Tesla trading.
So in the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4th, every Tesla shareholder read that Business Insider article?
Of course not. And nor would that be useful or relevant. That's not what efficient markets are all about. They are about the marginal trader. The person who is reading it sets the market price. The person who's reading, not the person who's trading. Most shareholders are not trading, but that doesn't change the fact that the market reacts on the margins to the to information as it comes out.
How many people read the Business Insider article during the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4th?
I don't know.
Okay. Continue, please.
No evidence of an abnormal change in price or trading volume. I'm quoting him, and that's true. There isn't, nor does there need to be, nor do I suggest there is. So he's merely making a statement of fact, which is true, but doesn't change anything.
So you agree with that sentence that says there is also no evidence in the Kinrich report of an abnormal change in the price or trading volume of Tesla Inc. stock during the 19 and 40-minute time frames he focuses on? Certainly
trading volume, because I certainly didn't say anything about it. Whether the 20 cents or the whatever the other number is are attributable is the question we've been asking all day, and I'm not concluding that they are, but I'm concluding that I've ruled out lots of other possible explanations.
That doesn't say attributable. That sentence says references an abnormal change in the price or trading volume.
Right. And I will agree that during any given day, a 20-cent change or whatever the other...
Sorry, that I will agree in a given day.
That in any given day, a 20-cent change or whatever the magnitude of the other day's changes were not atypical.
All right. True or false, there is no evidence of an abnormal change in the price or trading volume of Tesla stock during the 19 and 40-minute time frames you focused on in your report?
Compound.
I think there is no evidence of any of that. That's true for trading volume. And if by abnormal change in price we mean, is that a magnitude of price change that occurs in other periods, I would agree that that same magnitude does occur in other periods. It's not does occur in other periods. It's not particularly abnormal. It's not unusual. So again, I don't think it's a false statement. I just don't think making that statement in any way discredits anything I've done.
Okay, please continue.
his comparisons to other periods and other years is just irrelevant. I've already discussed why. I'm in the middle of page 6. Much of this I've already covered, so I'm not repeating myself. The last paragraph on page 6, he's saying, using Kinrich's own flawed, quote, correlation is causation reasoning. I'll stop there because I make no such assertion, and that's just untrue. I do not say correlation is causation. I never would.
Well, you don't have any opinion, or you don't have an opinion that Mr. Tripp's revelations to the Business Insider articles caused a diminution in Tesla's stock value. You've tried to eliminate other causes. You don't have an opinion that there was actual causation. Is that right?
That's correct. I've eliminated other things that one would usually expect to be causes and established those are not. And what we have left is what we have left. And it's going to be up to the finder of fact to decide whether this is something that captures the Tripp information. In other words, my analysis identifies information that is not otherwise explained, and I will let someone else decide what to do with that fact. He misstates my own reasoning. We've already talked about most of this, so I'm going to just keep going. All his comparisons to subsequent events and later dates is meaningless because those are all influenced by the events that happened then. His assertions about June 6th, I think, basically parallel his June 4th assertions, so I don't think there's anything we haven't covered. I'm now on to page 9. There's a statement that's just really odd. The last sentence of the big paragraph on page 9. I'm quoting, additionally, Kinrich provides no data to support his assumption that Tesla Inc. stock should or normally would track these indices on a given day. I don't make that assumption. I merely am saying that those are the kind of things one would look at to possibly explain movements in prices. You gave me the assumption, or not the assumption, the hypothetical, that if the stock market had fallen 10% on that day, we would expect some kind of a reaction from Tesla stock. And all I'm noting is that the market actually went up on those days. Therefore, we do not have an explanation tied to a change in the market index. And that's what I draw from that. I don't do anything else, and I think he's creating a straw man to attack, which is not related to what I did.
So it's fair to say you have no opinion that the Tesla stock should or normally would track the three indices you've discussed in any given day. Is that right?
Misstates prior testimony.
You would have I would expect a correlation of some sort. It doesn't mean 100% correlation, but I would not let me rephrase. I would expect that on any particular day, it may vary from that expectation.
All right, but you don't have an opinion as to what the degree of correlation is, correct?
Other than it's positive. I do have that opinion just based on experience. I didn't do a separate analysis, but there's a reason that Tesla is in the automotive index, because the people who put together indices put together similar kinds of businesses. So I do have an expectation of some positive correlation.
Well, how much positive correlation?
Any positive correlation is enough for me to reach my conclusion. I do not have a numerical value to it because I didn't go do it.
When you say any positive correlation, I mean, what do you mean by any positive correlation?
Anything greater than 0.
So any correlation greater than 0 is a positive correlation in your mind?
By definition, that's what a positive correlation means, is a correlation greater than 0.
Okay.
And then the charts are, again, meaningless because we're trying to isolate an event. We're not trying to say what else influenced Tesla's stock price over the time. There certainly are many events that have influenced Tesla's stock, and many events that influenced it probably more than the Business Insider articles. That's not particularly relevant. Now I'm on page 11.
I want to go back to the point you made about correlations and positive correlations. I mean, there's such a thing as a correlation coefficient, correct?
Yes.
What is that?
Numerically or definitionally?
Definitionally.
It's a measure, a statistical measure of the relationship between changes in one variable and changes in another.
Do you have any opinion as to the correlation do you have any opinion as to the correlation coefficient between Tesla and any of those 3 indices we were discussing earlier?
Yes, in fact, those are all the answers I gave you about correlation were about that.
Well,
So,
other than that it's positive.
no, that's my opinion.
Okay.
That it's positive, and that is sufficient because the indices were moving up. Therefore, based on the correlation coefficient, you would expect Tesla to move up, and it didn't. That's all I needed from them. So that's why I didn't go and do a more in-depth analysis.
But you have no opinion as to what the strength of that particular correlation coefficient is, do you?
Other than a gut feel, but I don't have one that I relied on or quantified. In other words, there was no need to.
That gut feeling is what got you in trouble in that case we discussed earlier at the beginning of the deposition, isn't it?
It didn't. If you remember, that wasn't a criticism of me. It was a criticism of someone else.
But you relied on that gut feeling, and that got your opinion excluded, correct?
I relied on someone else's testimony, which after I did my opinion, that person was deposed and used the word gut feel. Did not do it before I did my analysis.
Well, you just used the word gut feeling, but how much of your opinion in this case is based on your gut feeling?
The fact that Tesla has a positive correlation is just based on experience, which you could call a gut feel. I don't think there's anything else here that is. Knowing it's positive is fairly non-controversial.
Well, let's go into that. I mean, wouldn't every stock, for example, let's take the NASDAQ composite. How many stocks are in that?
I don't know. Is that the one? Is that the NASDAQ 5000? I'm not even sure. It may be approximately 5,000 stocks.
How many are in the automotive index we were discussing earlier?
I don't know.
I mean, are you aware of any stock that has zero correlation to, say, the NASDAQ or the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones?
Not as I sit here. There are historically some that have very low correlations. I believe some have found that over the years gold mining stocks have very low, possibly even negative correlations. But I don't know if that's still true. It was true, years and years ago when I was in business school.
But can you think of any stock that has a zero correlation to those indices that I just mentioned?
Asked and answered.
I did just answer. I can't think of one. I haven't gone to look, so my lack of ability to think of it really doesn't indicate much.
Can you think of any stocks that have a negative correlation to the S&P 500, NASDAQ, or the NASDAQ Automotive Index?
I can't think of any. I just gave you an example that at one point gold mining stocks had, if not a zero, possibly a negative correlation, but I don't know if that's still true. It might have been true back when I was studying this in business school, and that's where I remember that from.
All right. Please continue with your discussion of Mr. Schultz's report.
I think we pretty much covered it. I think everything else is, we pretty much already dealt with.
Sir, the court reporter's handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 15. Have you ever seen this document before?
Sorry.
I think I was aware of it. I don't know if I've actually seen the document itself.
Tell you what, let's take a break. Can you do me it's not particularly long. Can you read the actual substance of the report during that break? So I'm going to ask you questions on it.
Okay.
Off the record?
Yeah.
We are off the record at 2:05 p.m. We are back on the record at 2:12 p.m.
Sir, you've had a chance to review Deposition Exhibit 15.
Yeah, at least a quick skim.
Okay. This is an expert opinion prepared by Christopher No.
Do you have your mic on, counsel?
Now that I have my mic on, sir, Exhibit 15 is an expert report prepared by Christopher No. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he is an assistant, or an expert assisting Elon Musk as the defendant in an action brought by the Securities and Exchange Commission.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
Well, Mr. No has provided an expert opinion in support of Mr. Musk's defense in this case.
So it appears.
Okay. And again, I assume you don't have any specific involvement with this particular SEC action against Mr. Musk, do you?
I was aware of it.
But you're not involved in it, are you?
I'm not opining on it or anything like that.
Thank you. But the purpose of this report by Mr. No is to opine on whether or not a particular tweet by Mr. Musk materially affected the Tesla stock price. Is that right?
That's what it appears, yes.
All right. And he explained to me the methodology Mr. No used to determine whether or not Mr. Musk's, well, back up. The tweet in question was a tweet that occurred at 7:15 p.m. on February 19th of 2019. Is that correct?
I don't know. I mean, I'm reading this live, so if you want to show me where it says that, I'll be happy to agree that that's what it says.
Paragraph 10 of the report on page 3. Can you read that for me, sir?
After the close of NASDAQ's regular market trading on February 19th, 2019, defendant posted a message on Twitter at 7:15 p.m. ET regarding Tesla's production capacity.
Okay. And then if you look at paragraph 13 of the report, what does it state?
You want me to read it, or what are you asking?
Please read it into the record.
I have been retained, meaning he, not me, I have been retained by counsel for defendant to evaluate whether the 7:15 p.m. tweet contained material information for Tesla shareholders, I'm sorry.
And how did Mr. No make it? Well, what was Mr. No's ultimate opinion as to whether or not the 7:15 tweet had material information for Tesla shareholders?
Again, just reading it, in paragraph 14, he says that he concludes that the 7:15 p.m. tweet did not contain material information for Tesla shareholders.
How did he reach that conclusion?
Objection calls for speculation.
I'd have to go through this and find out. I mean, I skimmed it, but I didn't study his methodology.
Okay, well, let's just go off the record again, and why don't you take a look
Oh,
at
I
it?
mean, this will take 2 hours. I'm not going to opine. If you want to show me something, but I'm not going to tell you what somebody else's methodology is on something I'm reading.
What somebody else's.
Methodology is on something I'm reading now while I'm in front of the camera.
We can go off the record.
Well, if you want him to read it, he can read it on the record, if that's how you want to use your time. I already let's go off the record for him to skim it, but if you want him to do an in-depth look at it, he can do that on the record.
You're saying it would take you 2 hours to read a 13-page report?
No. You asked me a question about methodology. If you want, I might not even be able to gather it all from the report. I don't know whether I have to go talk to any other people, go back and figure out what his data sources were. It may be that I can get much of it here, but I'm not going to describe somebody else's methodology upon a cold read.
Read paragraph 17 of the report, please. You don't have to read it into the record.
Yes?
Okay. So it appears that Mr. No in this case looked at a stock price decline from the close of trading, regular trading on February 19th through the opening of regular trading on February 20th of 2019, correct?
Yes.
And he determined that there was a stock price decline of 0.4%.
Yes.
He then went on to say, to put this price reaction in context, Exhibit 1 shows Tesla's daily stock price movements for September 2018 through February 19. As this exhibit shows, a 0.4% change is small in comparison to the general volatility of Tesla's stock price over this 6-month period. Given your earlier testimony about time frames, was it even appropriate for Mr. No to consider the 6-month period with respect to the diminution in stock price over February 19th to February 20th?
Objection. It calls for speculation. He hasn't read this entirety of the report in depth.
If I understand what he's doing based on what I have reviewed, the answer is yes, it is appropriate, because he's attempting to judge whether something's a material change. That wasn't a judgment I was making in this case. The material change does require comparison of what a typical change might be. And it's a different question. So the methodologies to answer them, of course, will change accordingly.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not there was a material change in Tesla stock price during the last 19 minutes of trading on June 4?
My judgment is that there was probably not. That's one reason I can't reach the causation conclusion.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not there was a material change of Tesla stock price during the last 40 minutes of trading?
What's Tesla stock price?
During the last 40 minutes of trading on June 6?
My judgment's the same. That is, my expectation is there was not, which is part of why I do not reach a causation conclusion.
So as I understand what you're saying here, it was appropriate for Mr. No to look at the 6-month window because he was specifically attempting to disprove a material change. Is that right?
Objection misstates the report.
I don't know what his intention was, but if one is investigating a question of materiality, then one wants to measure what the typical level of volatility or change is. Since that wasn't the question I was attempting to answer, that wasn't an inquiry I was pursuing.
And you have no opinion in this case regarding the stability of Tesla stock price following the publication of the two Business Insider articles, is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by stability. Well, I don't know what you mean by stability. I am sure I don't know. I'm sorry.
Right. Do you have any opinion as to whether or not the Tesla stock price demonstrated an unusual level of volatility following the publication of either Business Insider article?
I do not have an opinion on that.
Do you remember a case that you served as an expert in called Unitherm Food Systems, Inc.?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Unitherm Food Systems, Inc. versus Swift Eckrich, Inc.? Eckrich, Inc.
I remember, the trouble is I've done 2 cases for Unitherm, and I don't remember which one that was. So I probably remember it, but I don't know which case it was.
I believe I highlighted the portion that mentions you. I'm sorry, the court reporter has handed you what has been marked as Deposition Exhibit 16. And I believe I highlighted the portion
How far in, just so I can
pertaining
see?
to you on page 19.
Page 19. All right.
You know, what was the nature of the damages you were trying to ascertain in this case?
I don't remember. It's more than, I mean, the appeal is 15 years ago, so the case would have been 16 or 17 years ago. And I do not remember.
States on page 19, in other words, neither Kinrich's testimony nor Magnum's testimony attempted to show any form of causality, a critical element needed to establish antitrust injury. And a point upon which the judge instructed the jury. And a point upon which the judge instructed the jury correctly.
Is there a portion in this opinion where it shows the full name? I see the highlighted part where it says Dr. Kinrich, but
It's me, and
It's
I'm
you-
not
it's you,
doctor.
okay.
Yes,
Just
it is
making
me.
sure.
It is me, even though I'm not a doctor, and
Okay.
the court is wrong about that. I do remember doing this case. I don't remember what we did.
Okay, so you don't recall that the judge in this case found that your opinion failed to establish the causation necessary to prove injury?
No, as I read this, the judge did not establish that. That is, the judge let it go to the jury.
Well, I mean the appellate judge.
I don't remember that I was ever trying to establish causation. I remember other witnesses were, and apparently they failed,
Well,
or at least possibly based on this paragraph.
okay. But your name is mentioned together with somebody named Magnum. Who was Magnum? Mangum.
He was an economist who was working on antitrust liability and causation, as I recall.
So is it your recollection that you weren't tasked with identifying the causation element of the antitrust injury in this case?
I think that's probably true, because on antitrust, I'm almost never going to do causation.
Do you know what an event study is?
Yes?
What is an event study?
Broadly speaking, it's a study about the impact of events on whatever you're measuring, such as the stock price, for example.
Would you consider your work in this case an event study?
It's in the same neighborhood, but because I'm not concluding about causation, I would say it probably isn't quite an event study, but it's certainly got some characteristics that are related.
I will represent to you, Mr. Kinrich, that the Tesla stock price closed at $332.10 on June 11. Do you have any reason to dispute that?
Since I don't know the answer, I have no reason to dispute it, no matter what number you gave me.
And in this case, you used two specific windows, a window of last 19 minutes of trading on June 4 and last 40 minutes of trading on June 6. Is that correct?
Yes.
If the stock price by June 11 was $332.10, if you had used a window of, say, June 4 to June 11, then there'd be no damages according to your methodology. Is that right?
Incomplete hypothetical. But you can answer.
No, that is not right.
Why is that not right?
Because the methodology would require consideration of other intervening causes as well. By doing the time period I did, I identified no such intervening causes. By causes, I mean news articles or market movements or things like that. In order to, if I had used a much longer period, I would have to adjust for, to the extent possible, those other market and industry moves, as well as news about Tesla.
Do you have any opinions in this case that we've not discussed here today?
I don't believe so.
I think that's all the questions I have for you, sir. My counterparts may have some questions. I may have some follow-up based on that.
Well, I think you're all going to be happy that I have nothing to ask, and so we can probably just do a stipulation on the record, and everyone leaves early.
Okay.
So I want to designate the transcript confidential, and then as far as a stipulation, assuming counsel agrees, I'd like to relieve the court reporter of her duties to hold the original, have the original come to me, and then the witness shall have 30 days to review, make any changes, and sign. And if it's not signed after that 30-day period, it can be used, a certified copy can be used as if it is the original. Sound good?
Fine by me.
Copy, counsel?
Yes, please.
That's it. This marks the end of media number 2 in the concluded deposition of Jeffrey H. Kinrich. We are off the record at 2:30 p.m.